Good morning. Today is 23 January, the year 2026. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in our country's military conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum along with fellow volunteer Diane Thompson, and today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing a fellow volunteer, Chief Warrant 5, Mike Hanten. Chief Warrant Hanten was a line officer in the Navy and then was in the water traffic of the Army Transportation Corps with two tours to the Middle East, one during the Gulf War and one during the Iraqi War. So we're going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. Mike, really good to have you here, buddy.
Good to be here.
Okay, Mike, first of all, would you please state and spell your full name?
Sure, it's Michael A. Hanten, and that's Hanten.
And where were you born?
I was born in Vermillion, South Dakota.
And whereabouts is that?
Southeast South Dakota, east of the Missouri River, kind of divides the state
Okay. And when were you born?
March 22nd, 1958.
Okay. And how big was Vermillion, and how big is it now?
That's a really good question. I was born there, but I never actually lived there.
Oh, okay.
And then we moved around a lot between Oklahoma and South Dakota and that, and had numerous different addresses between when I was born in '58, and then my dad became a buyer for North American Aviation in Los Angeles area and moved there. And so most of my childhood that I remember was there, although I do remember some pretty massive thunderstorms in Oklahoma when I was a toddler.
So your dad, what was his name?
Bernard A. Hanten, B.A. Hanten.
And where was he from?
He was from
yeah.
He was from this little town, also in South Dakota, as well as my wife. They both went to high school together.
Really?
In White Lake, South Dakota. I think their high school class was like 12 people. So.
And where did his ancestors come from, like from the old country?
They were from Luxembourg.
Oh.
So there's a little Germanic background there, yeah.
So was Hanten a different name, or was it the very same all the way back to then?
No, it was a German. The Hanten is a Germanic name, so it came with it from there, yeah.
Yeah.
As far as I know, there was no changing of the name when they came through Ellis Island, like happened with a lot of people.
A lot of people do, yeah. And so how did the family, did he come with his family, or had some of them been here?
No, actually, they immigrated in the early 1900s. So my great-grandfather, I think, was who came over, and then my grandfather owned the general store in White Lake, South Dakota, and then they had my dad, and then he had a sister as well, and they're still there. Yeah.
Was your dad in the service?
He was not. He had polio when he was an adolescent, and he had a lot of surgeries on one of his legs, so he was basically unable to qualify for combat in World War II, which was only would have been.
You're right. And your mom, what was her name and her maiden name?
Her name was Elaine M. Hanten, or actually Cudmore was the maiden name,
okay.
Right? And her grandfather, or her father, was a farmer on the edge of town there. They had a farm place, and actually we still have some farm land that.
Cuddle, that sounds like, is that an English name? British? Or, did they all
I don't know for some reason I don't know as much about the ancestry on that side. Yeah.
Have any brothers and sisters?
I have one brother and one sister. My brother's still alive. He's retired now. He was a police officer in San Diego for
what
most
was
of his
his name?
career. Mark.
Okay.
Mark D. Hanten, yeah. He retired from San Diego as a precinct captain.
Really?
And then my sister, unfortunately, passed away from breast cancer in her 40s.
Oh.
So she hasn't been around for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, when you were growing up, you said you moved around a bit. Where did you go to grade school?
Well, we moved around until we went to California, and then in 1964, I think I was 5. My parents, both of them, their kind of goal was to find some kind of fishing lodge or outdoor kind of thing. When they were in college, they both, or they started going out, was they went to Yellowstone and worked at Yellowstone. My dad was helping to run the boat rental area, and then my mom was working in the hotel side, and they started going out together there, and then they decided they liked that kind of life. And so while my dad was working as a buyer for North American there in the Buena Park area in LA, they were searching for a place to buy, and they bought a fishing lodge in southern Oregon near the town of Grants Pass on the Rogue River. And so we moved there in 1964, I think in the spring of '64. And then that's where I really grew up at. Okay. I was there, the place is still there. My parents are both dead, and it's being run now by my sister's son. So, yeah, it's still there. And that's what I grew up doing, I was a fishing guide and a rafting guide. So I started doing that when I started boating when I was 13, or 10 is when my dad taught me how to row in whitewater, and then I was working for the whitewater company at 13 as a baggage boatman.
So whitewater is in southern Oregon?
Yeah, we were on the Rogue River, and we were running river trips, and that was a really interesting time, and very early on in the development of that whole.
So what kind of fish do they have in the Rogue River?
Mainly steelhead was what we were after, which are ocean run rainbow trout. And they get up to 10, 15 pounds. Mm-hmm. They tend to follow the salmon around and eat their eggs.
I see, yeah. So you must have really enjoyed that, huh?
That was great. I mean, my childhood was the best. I started taking customers on the river trips when I was 15, and then 16, the state came up with a new law where guides all had to be licensed. And so I was actually the youngest licensed guide in the state of Oregon at 16. 16 was the minimum age you could get a license for.
So what kind of boats would you take them on?
In the summer we were using rubber rafts. And in those days the technology this was early 70s, they were basically military surplus boats, these vulcanized canvas. They were super heavy, and they were pretty flat, and they didn't have much maneuverability. So they were a real workout to haul those things. They were 10-man and 15-man assault boats basically, and we used oars instead of paddles. And
so no engines on them.
No engines, no. Yeah. That was all. And that's what we used in the summertime. And then in the fishing season, which was in the fall, we used wood or aluminum drift boats, the McKinsey model drift boats. Mm-hmm. They're about 15, 16 feet long, a dory kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. How wide was the river in your area?
The river where I was, it depends. In some of the canyons, it was maybe 30 feet wide, and then it had broadened out. Right in front of the lodge where we were at, it was almost it was a big lagoon there, and it was almost a quarter mile wide right there. But normally it would be like 100 to 150 feet on average.
Yeah, and how deep?
That varied greatly. So where the rapids were, it might only be this deep. And then some of the big still water areas, it could get up to 45, 50. I scuba dove in front of our house there, and it was like 50 feet deep out there.
Did it freeze over during the winter?
Very seldom, but I do remember one winter where we actually, the ice was like that thick, and we could actually walk around out on there were the big pressure rifts where the ice had cracked and fracture up like that. That was really rare.
Yeah.
It flooded though every year, and that was that was a haunting thing. I mean, that very first year we were there was a record flood that they ever had in the whole century.
Was your lodge up high, pretty high?
The lodge was it was a daylight basement kind of thing, so that it was a slope, and it was from the roadside, it was 2 stories tall, but from the riverside it was 3 stories tall. And it was 6 feet in the second story.
Wow.
Of water in there. And all of the outbuildings, that was in 1964, December, all of the outbuildings were carried away. And so when it was a big, I was like 5, 6 years old, and coming down from the upstairs where we spent the night and seeing nothing but that whole quarter mile was just this big giant whirlpool of big logs and stuff like that going around. And it was into the house in the basement while we were evacuating there. And coming back from that, there was nothing there but the main building. And it had, I remember it had a big giant log stuck right through the middle of the building where it came in the big plate glass window and crashed through the fireplace. The fireplace, this had this big fireplace, and it was open, it was fireplace on both sides, so they used the same chimney. And the log went right through into the other, took out the whole fireplace. So,
was there anything that was done later to so that wouldn't happen so much?
Yeah. When we rebuilt, and I was actually in the long term of things, that actually was a fortunate thing. My dad was able to get disaster relief, really low interest loans, and so we rebuilt all the out structures, including the cabins that people stayed in. And when he built those, he put them all up on like 10-foot pilings.
Okay.
So you parked underneath of them, and then
But you couldn't do anything for the river to prevent that?
No,
like
eventually the Army Corps of Engineers, there was a flood relief kind of thing. They built a dam upriver, and that helped somewhat. I mean, there's always controversy over that, but they say that the amount of water that they keep up there would have only made like 1 foot of difference in 1964. But anyways.
And the lodge itself, did it have like hotel rooms in it, or were they just
At the
cabins,
time, it had like 9 rooms up on the 3rd floor, and then there was the second floor was the main. That's where the kitchen and the dining room, and we served family style dinners, big tables in the dining room, so all the people would come and eat at the same time, and we could handle about 32 customers, 32 people staying there. So we had those 9 rooms upstairs, and then when the cabins were replaced, we ended up with 9 units out there. And that's where people mostly stayed, was in the cabins. And then they'd all come up for dinner and breakfast in the morning.
How many employees did you have?
It varied. It was very seasonal. We would start up in May and then close down around November 15th every year. And so pretty much everybody would go away at that point, except for just the family. And we'd usually have like one accountant, bookkeeper kind of person that would stay and
So
help.
it sounds like your mom and dad were pretty busy most of the
Oh,
time.
they were super busy, yeah. It was a true family business. So, I mean, I was, like I said, when I got to start guiding at 13, that was great news for me, because before that I was a yard guy.
So you would take them out for like how long and how far up the river or down the river?
Well,
would you go?
we started at our house. We were doing 3-day long and 4-day long trips down through the whole length
So they
of the river.
camp at night, kind of a thing?
Yeah, the 4-day trips were camping trips, and the 3-day trips, there were other lodges further down the river. And so my dad, at the time, nobody was doing it in the summer. It was all fishing in the fall. And so he worked with the lodges and got secured. Like every Thursday we were at Black Bar Lodge, and then every Friday we were at Mariel Lodge, and then we would take out the next day. So those were 3-day, 2-night trips. And then, so basically you got a 4-day trip and a 3-day trip, that's 7 days a week. So we were 24/7 on the river.
The river, did it have much of a current?
Yeah, it was considered a Class 4 river, Class 4 rapids. It did have one Class 5 called Rainy Falls, which is basically a portage around that. You could run it, you could actually, but you couldn't run it continually successfully and not end up with your boat upside down. And you would never take people through there. So I think in my life, when you're a teenage kid, you're there and you got this boat and everybody has a lot of bravado. So I ran Rainy Falls, I think 3 or 4 times, which is a huge adrenaline rush. And I managed to not flip the boat ever. So I figured I got 3 or 4. I'm not going to do anymore because chances are you're not going to be able to.
And paddling downriver or upriver, which way was the harder? I would think going against the current. But
Well, we basically, when you were man-powered, there were most of the river, in a rapid, you can't row up a rapid. It's just, the river's running about 15 miles an hour or so through there. The still waters, of course, you can follow the eddies and work your way up. But so the way the trips work, and where they work mostly on all rivers, is you put in and up here, and then the boats go down, and then you either shuttle vehicles down to the other end, or we would have our guys meet us down there on the 3rd day. And that was about 45, 50 miles the whole trip was. And then they would pick us up there, and then we'd drive back over the mountain and come back home and then get ready for the next trip the next morning.
And would the weather be a factor as far as whether you went or didn't go?
No, it was never a factor on whether or not we went. We always went. The only thing that would prevent us from going in those days was a forest fire occasionally. I don't remember. Once, I think 1 year out of all that, there was a big fire on the river, and they closed it down so no one could go through there. And I think we lost a trip on that one. Oddly as well, back in the early days, in the summer, the river, of course, it was all natural. The dam wasn't there yet. And so it would start in the spring, and it'd be pretty high water. And then by August, it would be really low. And boy, I remember some days in late August where the river was so low that it would literally, what we would normally get into the lodge at Black Bar at like 3 in the afternoon, and the river was so low that we wouldn't get in till like 8 o'clock at night, and we'd be actually pulling the boats behind us through some of the shallow spots.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it just wouldn't flow very quickly because it was, the rapids that normally are maybe 6 feet deep are now like this deep, and a lot of gravel bars, and you'd just be like pulling them down over the bars and stuff like that. It was a lot of work.
And was that fly fishing or what kind of?
That was just scenic stuff
That
in
was
the
just
summer.
scenic,
Right.
but
The fishing would start around the middle of September.
and that would be fly fishing basically.
It was mostly fly fishing. In those days, it was almost all fly fishing and basically steelhead fishing. The salmon fishery kind of built up over the years, and they've got quite a salmon. They started planting a lot of salmon in there. So.
What was the biggest fish that you caught, or the most exciting
I think
for you?
I caught a couple that were about 36 inches long. They were always fun.
Give you quite a fight?
Yeah, on a fly rod, single action fly rod, you're basically using your palm of your hand as a brake instead of a bunch of drag on the reel.
Yeah.
And so it's fun. I still enjoy doing that. We had the biggest steelhead I ever saw was caught by one of our guides at the lodge there in it was probably I'd say it was in the 90s after I got off active duty in the Navy and went back there. And that fish was like 43 inches long.
Wow.
It looked like a salmon, and then you look at it and go, wait a second, the tail's the wrong shape, and it's like, good God, that's not a Chinook salmon, that's a steelhead, and it was massive. The thing was like this long.
Yeah. Did you do any hunting?
I hunted deer a little bit when I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm. And where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at Grants Pass High School.
How far away was that?
It was about 27 miles into town, yeah, from where I grew up.
Okay.
We were pretty rural. The lodge was right along river out in the canyon there. And our nearest neighbor was about a mile away. And then the next nearest neighbor after that was another 3 or 4 miles.
Would you take a bus or?
Yeah, there was a bus, typical, that's basically when I started grade school in Merlin, which is a town about 9 or 10 miles away, a little town.
Yeah.
And then went through middle school at a middle school that was close to Merlin. It was probably another 2 miles away. Mm-hmm. And then started going to Grants Pass High School in, what would that have been, 73, I think.
Did you play any sports in high school?
Yeah, I played, starting in 7th grade, I played football every year, and basketball through, I think, sophomore year. Couldn't play baseball. I really enjoyed baseball, and I started trying to do Little League, but it was in the summer or rafting, mm-hmm. So it just didn't work. I just couldn't do it. So I did track in the spring at school as well as shot put and discus and that kind of stuff.
Did you drive to school?
I did. Yeah, starting about 16.
You remember the first car that you had?
Yeah, it was a Chevrolet Caprice station wagon that my grandfather had owned, and it smelled like his cigars. But that thing you wouldn't even realize it, and you're doing 75 miles an hour because and I hit a deer one time out there on that road doing like 70 miles an hour, and I stopped, and the deer like flew way over the car and flew off the road and down the canyon into the river. And I stopped, pulled the car over, I went around and looked at the front, and there was no damage at all. So there was like one little piece of the grill, one of the little things was broken out of it. And other than that, nothing was bent. I just hopped in the car and drove on. It was no problem.
What model was that? What year was it?
I think it was early 60s. Station wagon, yeah. And then
what color was it?
It was kind of a light blue with wood paneling.
Oh.
So it wasn't real wood though. It was painted.
Yeah.
Wasn't old enough to be an actual woody.
Yeah. That's cool. So what did your kids do for fun when you were in high school? Did you have dates, or did you have a special girlfriend in high school?
No, I didn't really have a special girlfriend in high school. That was one of the downsides when you're 27 miles away. Mm-hmm. And plus in the fall, it was always the height of our season all the way through, the 1st of December. So even when I was playing football, I would have to hitchhike home. Yeah. The activity bus would take me about 9 miles to where I could get 9 miles from home. And then from there, I would football was a big deal in Grants Pass, and it's kind of a Friday night lights kind of thing. Sure. And so I would carry my football helmet with me, so the cars driving by would see this helmet, and I could get a ride that way, and then if I could find someone that was going down to far enough, I'd hitchhike home.
What position did you play?
I was offensive tackle. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How big were you?
Oh, I was pretty strong from all the rowing. Mm-hmm. My biggest problem in those days was I wore glasses, and they didn't have, all the modern sports glasses and all that stuff. So I started off, I was a defensive tackle, but you'd come across the line and hit the guy, and then my glasses would go like that, and then I'd always have to straighten my glasses out and try to figure out where the hell the ball was. So defense just wasn't working for me. And it was kind of a shame, I think. I think I could have been a much better. I ended up, I lettered at high school my junior and senior years. And in high school, I wrestled on the varsity as well, which was actually, that was pretty fun. I was never in better shape than when I wrestled, that's for sure.
Did you guys have a hangout hamburger joint or something in Grant Pass you would like to go to?
Oh yeah, there was a couple of places. It was Abby's Pizza Parlor. It was a big hangout. And,
Abby's, did you say?
Yeah.
ABB.
ABBYS, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there was the Hodges High School store, which was like it was kind of a bookstore, malt shop right across the street from the high school. That's where everybody went.
Uh-huh.
You know, when you were in school, that was a big hangout. And, you know, you could go there and get a hamburger and a milkshake, and they played. You know, they played what we now call oldies, right? So
yeah,
right.
Yeah. And movie theater. Did you go to the movies in Grants Pass?
Yeah, a little bit. You know, like I said, it was kind of hard in the social life when you lived 27 miles away, and especially before you were allowed to drive. So, you know, until I was about 17, I really couldn't go on dates. Right. Yeah. So, I started doing that in my junior and
do you remember the name of the theater that you would like to go to?
That was the Rogue Theater. Yeah, it's still there. It was pretty much the only one there. So the town has grown quite a bit since then.
Yeah. And your brother, was he older or younger than you?
He was younger.
Okay, so he worked.
I was the oldest.
But he worked with the family business too?
Yeah. My brother ended up also guiding. Most of our guides, especially in the summer, when we were doing the recreational, scenic river rafting stuff, our guides were all pretty young. And at one point, when I was in college, I was still doing it in the summer, and I was the head guide at that point. I was like the oldest guy there. 3 of them were my brother's age, and you know, at that time I was 18. 19, and then they were all 16. So we had a pretty young group. Yeah. It was pretty tight. There was about 7 of us.
And you had a lot of repeat clientele, pretty much?
Yeah, we did. We had, especially in the fishing season, there was people that would come back year after year for
Where
that.
would they usually come from? California? Or?
We got a lot of people from California. We had a couple of big... there was a law firm from Sacramento. They'd bring their entire law firm as a kind of an incentive thing. Right. They'd take the whole place for actually 2 weekends out of the year. And they did kind of a retreat there.
Remember any of your favorite teachers or coaches in high school?
Yeah, I remember when I was in junior high, I took a high school class. At the junior high was basically, it was the biology class, and it kind of got me on the science and, you know, track, because it would have been equivalent nowadays of AP stuff. And a lot of people didn't think I belonged in that class, but I got straight A's in there, and the teacher was really good, and I got along with him, and he kind of, I think he had a big influence on my academic future. At that point, probably the most influence of any teacher ever up till that point. Unfortunately, when I got in high school, I had a really bad algebra teacher, and that almost ruined me forever after that. But boy, I always tell algebra is so important, and I always tell kids nowadays, it's like, look, algebra is the key to everything. If you don't understand the algebra, you can't do the calculus. But if you understand algebra, the rest of it's easy, because that's all it is manipulating the numbers around into the right form.
So what year did you graduate from high school?
76, the bicentennial year. Yeah.
Okay. And Okay. Do you remember much about the Vietnam War when you were?
I do,
you were in
yeah.
high school?
I of course remember watching the evening news with Walter Cronkite and the daily news stories that were on that almost every night. A lot of air cav kind of stuff you see in the helicopters and some combat footage and all that kind of thing. And it's kind of weird, even though my dad was 4F during World War II, he was a big, there's no doubt in my mind he would have volunteered to go in a heartbeat. And so my kind of culture in the family was, I grew up watching, my dad was a big John Wayne fan, and so we watched a lot of war movies, and I remember a lot of our, you asked earlier what we did for fun. Well, my brother and I would go out and play Army in the woods, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, we were in the woods, there wasn't nothing around there, and we actually did crazy stuff. One time I dug this, we had a beach, down to the, and I would fortify, make foxholes down there and sandbags and all this kind of stuff to play Army. And then I dug a bunker one time and put a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood on top of it, which isn't very strong, and then covered it up with, well, basically I didn't realize it. What I did was I built a tire trap for the lawnmower. We had a riding lawnmower, and so my dad was really hacked at me when he was driving along mowing the lawn, and the whole thing caved in, and he drove over the top of my bunker in the lawnmower.
With him aboard.
Yeah, that didn't turn out really well for me. Yeah.
So what did you do after high school then?
Well, I continued, working there in the summer, but the senior year of high school was pretty. My whole goal at that point was to get accepted into the U.S. Military Academy or the Naval Academy. And in junior high, I ran into these coffee table books, one of them on Annapolis and one of them on West Point, and I would go in there and look at these books all the time in junior high and high school. And so I applied. At the time, Vietnam was just wrapped up. The Navy seemed more interesting to me. I really would have preferred to be a naval officer, but you know how it is, there's rumors of, and it's like, what I was told was that, and I think this was a Vietnam kind of thing, was because the Army was having such a hard time with junior officers in the Army trying to get them, that allegedly the medical standards, the physical standards were less stringent in the Army. And I knew I had really bad eyesight. So I was afraid I wouldn't be able to get accepted in the Navy in Annapolis, which is actually where I preferred to go. So I applied for an appointment to West Point, and I got, got letters. It was a lot easier in those days. Now it's super competitive to get in there. But in those days, I don't know, I got I got both senators and our congressmen, all three of them nominated me to go. And I got accepted and everything went fine. And then, so that was the game plan. That was it. I was going to West Point. And then around December, 1st of January, I had to go up to McChord Air Force Base and have my physical to get accepted to go there. That was like the last step. And I went up there and my eyesight was too bad. And they found a heart murmur that nobody had ever found in my whole life before that either. So I was found not physically qualified. And then, big surprise to me at the time, they said, oh yeah, by the way, the physical standards are the same for everything. Not only aren't you qualified to go to West Point or Annapolis, you're also disqualified from any of the ROTC programs. So that was really devastating to me. That was like my whole life plan. And so now here it is, January of, halfway through my senior year. in high school, and my whole game plan has just been shot. So I immediately put in applications at Oregon and Oregon State. And it's still amazing to me. These days, that would never fly. You could never get that done and get accepted, because that's also gotten really competitive and everything, and much more expensive and exclusive and everything else. So I got accepted to both schools, and then I went up and went on a trip to both places, and I found out that Oregon State had Navy and Army ROTC, plus they had a crew team for rowing, and Oregon had one too, but the Oregon State one was much better. And then it was also a lot closer to where my dad and I went duck hunting up there. So I said, okay, and the skiing was closer too, so I chose Oregon State. And then when I went to school that fall, that would have been September of '76, I went to the Navy ROTC battalion, and just to see what I could do there. And they said, well, you can join up and be what's known as a college program guy, which is just like a volunteer, and you're not on a scholarship, or you have no obligation or anything, and we don't have any obligation to take you, but you can participate and take, be in the classes, and if you show you have a high aptitude for this. And I told them I had been found not physically qualified, and they said, well, you'll have a new physical, and there's an opportunity there. And if you do a few years with us and you demonstrate you have a high aptitude for the service, we can get a waiver for the medical stuff, most likely, if it's not, too egregious. So I said, yeah, sure, sign me up. So I came into it kind of the back door via the Navy ROTC college program. And it turns out I did have a very high aptitude for that stuff, because I was really interested in it. And so later on, they submitted a waiver request for me, and I ended up getting commissioned through there. I had to fight with them a little bit. They wanted to be a supply officer. And I was like, nah, I'm either, I wanted to be a pilot. I started flying airplanes. My dad had several projects where we rebuilt airplanes, including a Aranca L3 spotter aircraft from World War II, and a Luscombe project that we did, and then a PA-18 Super Cub that we refurbished and everything. And that's the airplane that I learned how to fly in when I was 17. So, I really wanted to be like a Navy pilot. But I knew with my eyesight it was just not in the cards at all. So I said, okay, I'll drive ships. That sounds good. They wanted me to be a supply officer. I said, nope, I'm not going as a supply officer. So they gave me a waiver to be a surface line guy, and that's what I ended up doing.
I want to ask you, did flying come easy to you?
Yeah, pretty easy. It was kind of... I learned in a tail dragger course, and that was kind of interesting. The biggest problem I had, and probably it's the same with everybody, I didn't use my feet enough, and so coming down the runway on the landings especially, I wasn't really. So it was really interesting, the technique. We were at a rural airport out near Grants Pass there. It's still pretty much the same these days. It's an uncontrolled airport, not that much traffic. So we would, my instructor, after a couple of lessons, he said, look, you're having a little trouble with your feet and the rudder pedals. So we're just going to go out on the runway here. We're going to add some throttle, go down the runway. I want you to get the tail up off the ground. And then I just want you to drive down the runway, and then pull the throttle and stop and let the tail drop back down, and then we're going to turn around and we're just going to go the other way. So we spent an entire hour just fast taxiing up and down the runway. If any traffic came in, we'd go over on the taxiway. And the rest of the time and so I really figured out the feed at that point. And at the end of that hour, I was really good at it. I almost wrecked my car when I was leaving that afternoon, because when you come out of the thing, there's a 90-degree turn, and that's right foot. So instead of turning, I just almost launched straight across at a high throttle across the road. So that was probably the hardest part of the whole thing, was switching back and forth from a car to an airplane, is the rudder pedals and the accelerator and brake.
But your eyesight didn't bother you at all?
No. I was really blind, but I had these really thick Coke bottle glasses, and when I was wearing the glasses, they were 20/20, so that was acceptable there.
So did you go 4 years at Oregon State then? Or?
Yeah, actually, I did. I was supposed to graduate in the class of '80, and then around December of '79, I was thinking about it, and I was going, we had a bunch of guys that were, the previous year I noticed, they all graduate in June. And then, this, of course, all the ROTCs in the whole country, plus the Naval Academy and the Military Academy, they all graduate in June too, right? So there's like 1 million ensigns right then, and they don't have enough capacity in the schools, so you get all these guys just stashed, hanging out doing nothing. We had guys at the unit that were stationed at the unit that had nothing to do for like 6 months. I said, well, geez. Plus the pay wasn't as good as I was making as a river guide. And I said, hey, what would be really good is if I didn't graduate on time. So I dropped the class and made sure that I was 3 hours short of graduating. And of course, when the cadre at the ROTC figured that out in spring term, they're like, hey, you're going to be short. You're not going to be able to graduate in time. And I'm like, oh, man, how did that happen? So I ended up having to extend at Oregon State for 1 more semester, and that's why I graduated in December. But I did a whole nother season and a whole nother fishing season and made a bunch of money, which I took that money and bought gold with it, which I still have, and by golly, that was a really good investment.
Yeah, it is. That's it. It's really taken off. So, when did you find out? Well, you went to, you didn't have to go to OCS. So they got the waiver. I got the waiver in start of my junior year at Oregon State. As a matter of fact, that was another weird thing. I was boating that summer course, and they were supposed to call me and let me know if I got the waiver or not, because I was considering, if I didn't get the waiver and I was, at that point, I'd be out, then I didn't really see any reason to go back to school that fall. I could stay and be a fishing guide all fall and then go back winter term and just kind of slow things down, and still end up getting my college degree eventually, but I would probably just do winter and spring term and work summer and fall every year. Fishing guide was, in those days, you made really good money doing that, so that was my plan. Well, I was on a river trip, one of our summer trips in about August, and did something really stupid down at the Muriel Lodge down there. They had a Honda 90 trail bike, and me and one of the other guys drove up to took this bike and rode it up to this campground, and it went up this creek called Mule Creek, and it was a big canyon with the vertical walls, and we walked up there a lot, and it was a spectacular view, but it was like vertical canyon walls with this trail that was basically carved out, blasted out with dynamite on the side of it back in the old WPA days in the 20s and 30s, for miners to go up there and stuff. And so we decided to drive this Trail 90 up this trail, and we got going too slow and lost our balance and went over the side, and it was close to 90 feet down to the creek. So I was flying on my back, like looking up at the canyon walls receding,
And what I found, I've had a number of time dilation events in my life where I was pretty sure I was dead, and that was one of them. And I'm like falling. And it's funny, you know, I never had this, you know, reliving your life. Mostly I was thinking, well, this is the stupidest way to die. I said, man, this is just embarrassing. So as it turned out, I landed in 18 inches of water down there, and I had a puffy jacket on at the time, and I never even got a bruise, except for my arm hit an exposed rock, and I broke my arm.
Oh.
So that kind of, at that point, I had decided, well, my waiver never came through. They never called me and told me I was in, so I guess, so at that point, I had planned on not going back to school. Well, now I had a broken arm, and I wasn't going to be able to row for like 9 weeks, which was most of the fishing season. So I said, well, I guess I'll go back to school. So I went back to school, and I had a beard, and I had long hair, and I was basically looking like a hippie boatman. So I went down just to visit the ROTC guys and talk to my instructors, especially my sophomore class instructor, who's the guy that taught us celestial navigation and naval operations and all the navigation and piloting stuff, which I really enjoyed. And I went down there, and they said, "Where the hell have you been? You know, you gotta sign your thing, and you're in business here. What, you know, you got your waiver." I'm like, "Well, why didn't you guys call and tell me that?" "Oh, I guess we forgot." And it's like, well, it's fortunate I broke my arm, otherwise I wouldn't even be here. So yeah, that's how I ended up actually in the Navy.
I meant to ask you, was your family very religious when you were growing up? Did you go to church a lot?
You know, my mother was, my dad not so much, and my mom, we were Catholics. We had to go to church every Sunday, and so yeah, we went to, you know, it was a long ordeal to get all dressed up and go into town for, you know, as a teenage boy, the only draw for me was like just to see all the teenage girls that would dress up really nice to go to church.
Yeah.
But yeah, so after I graduated from high school and went off on my own, I kind of, you know, I went through catechism and stuff, and the nuns didn't like me very much because I started questioning things, and they weren't happy that I was spreading dissent amongst the other students, so it wasn't going well.
And I meant to ask you, were you in a fraternity at Oregon State?
No, I was not. I basically stayed as an independent.
Right.
I was in the dorms for 2 years, and then I was apartment with a roommate. My roommate was another ROTC guy. Actually, he was from Grants Pass as well. We graduated in the same class, and we kind of agreed to be roommates, and we were in the same dorm room.
Did you have any odd jobs at?
Not at that time. I
college?
didn't need to have an odd job
you-
because I had, you know, I made enough money in the summer that I could pay for school, and it wasn't a problem. And I did a lot of extracurricular stuff. I was in the drum and bugle corps in the Navy thing, and so we did a lot of basketball games and parades and stuff like that.
So did you play?
I played drums.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Had you done that before, or just learned how to do it?
Well, you know, when I was in junior high, I was in the band, and I played drum for a while there, and also I played saxophone in the band there. But when I went to high school, it kind of conflicted with, there was a conflict between football and the band because the band had to march in the football halftime and all this stuff. So I dropped the band, which I kind of regret to this day. I wish I would have been able to continue with the music as well, because I enjoy doing that. And I started playing guitar and stuff later on. Actually, you know, jumping way in the future, on my last deployment, my XO and I were talking about it. We ordered guitars on one of the websites, and they shipped them to us over there. So that I'd sit in my stateroom and learn how to play guitar for, you know, 9 months while I was driving the ship around. But But yeah, so I learned how to play the drums there, and then when I joined the drum and bugle corps for the Navy ROTC battalion, that was part of my proving that I had a high aptitude for it. And I started just dinking around playing a snare drum. They actually had signed me up to be a bugler, which I was a crappy bugler. But then I started playing, you know, a bunch of marching riffs and stuff on the drum. And they go, "Hey, you never said you could play drums." And I was like, "Yeah, I played drums." And I had a drum set when I was, you know, younger. And so they said, "Well, hell, you're going to be coming over here then." So after that, I played snare drum the whole time I was there, which I much preferred.
So where did you go when you went into the Navy? Where did you first go?
I was commissioned on December 20th, right after the end of the school term. And then I had leave, of course, right off for the holidays. And then I think I was supposed to report in to the USS Buchanan Adams class guided missile destroyer in San Diego on June 3rd or something like that. And so I went home for Christmas, and then right after New Year's I hopped in my Ford Pinto and crammed everything I owned into it with me and drove to San Diego. And I drove straight to Naval Station 32nd Street, where all the surface warfare ships were. Drove down, went over to the ship, and I was in my reporting uniform, you know, dress blues, and reported aboard, and they said, "Hey, glad you got here, we're getting underway." So my Ford Pinto with everything I owned it is parked on the pier, and all I got's a sea bag, and off we go. We're out for a week. And that was my introduction to the real Navy. And they made me the assistant gunnery officer while I was stashed there, because I still had to go to surface warfare officer school. And so I had a school date. Seems like it was somewhere around March. I was there for 2 months, January, February.
In San Diego?
In San Diego, yeah. At that time, the main surface warfare officer school was in Newport, Rhode Island, but they had a West Coast detachment that was at 32nd Street. So I got to go to that one, which was nice. I didn't have to move to Newport and then back again. So SWAS was at the Naval Amphibious Base, which was over on the Silver Strand over there by Coronado. So I had to commute across the bridge every day. That was kind of a pain. But while I was on the ship, one of the other junior officers, he was main propulsion assistant, he needed a roommate, and so we said, we'll get an apartment in Lemon Grove there. So we got an apartment, and then we would commute into the ship every morning. And then I stayed in the apartment when I went to SWAS, because I just had to go across the bridge at that point. So we lived together there until the ship deployed. They deployed, and then I had to get a new place. So I got a place over in Pacific Beach, which was a lot closer. Because at that point, I can't remember how long SWAS lasted. It seems like it was about 4 months. But then after I went to SWAS, I had to go to anti-submarine warfare officer school, which was over by Naval Training Center, San Diego, which was over in that area.
Rosecrans.
What's that?
Rosecrans.
Yeah, it was right off Rosecrans there, and so I moved over to PB, and then that was a quick, easy commute for me there. So I was there for another 5 or so months. I think the whole school process between SWAS, anti-submarine warfare school, then I had to be nuclear weapons trained, because in those days we had nuclear ASROC weapons on the ship. So turns out I was a nuclear weapons officer. And so that whole thing lasted until about December. And then I was finished school, and I reported back aboard the Buchanan at Sasebo, Japan.
I assume that a math background is very helpful in those schools.
It did prove to be helpful, and frankly, I didn't have one. When I went to Oregon State, since I wasn't a scholarship guy, I wasn't required to have the math background that the scholarship guys did. So I was a business major, and I had to take one class of calculus because of that crappy algebra teacher that I had in high school. I was really bad at it, which came up big time later on in my life. But at that point, it didn't hurt me any. What I think I ended up being a distinguished graduate at SWAS, and then I was number 2 in the anti-submarine warfare officer class, and strictly because I enjoyed the practical stuff, the labs, and where we did simulators, where we simulated and went through the combat stuff, and I was the top guy doing the actual job. The academic stuff, I'd kind of, so I ended up being the second place guy in the school for the anti-submarine warfare stuff. But I was really good at actually fighting submarines. So when I went to the ship, I took over there, and
Did you go back to the same ship?
yeah, I did. And that was an interesting thing too. Apparently, I was originally supposed to go to a Fram 1 old reserve destroyer out of New Orleans, the USS Sullivan, I think it was. And I didn't want to go there. I really liked the Buchanan. Plus, when I was there, in the 2 months I was there, I managed to finish like half of my personnel qualification standards to get my surface warfare officer qualification. I, got a running start on all that stuff and was really moving along. And so I liked the ship. I wanted to go back there, and they put in a request to have me come back to the ship. So that helped a lot. So I ended up back on the Buchanan again.
And you went to Sasebo?
I joined them in Sasebo. They were already
Oh,
deployed.
they were there.
Yeah, they were deployed.
Now,
while
what
I was.
part of Japan is that?
It's west coast, not too far from Nagasaki, as I remember. I joined them there. I think we were there for another couple of days. I was pretty busy at that point, so I didn't really take much liberty. And then we got underway, and then I finished the rest of that deployment with them. It was long enough to get a deployment ribbon, so it was more than 90 days. I think they were 180 days over there. So I got a little more than half of it. And we went, typical Westpac in those days, following a carrier around, and this was Cold War stuff. We went, home port while we were over there was the Philippines, Longapo. So we were down there. We also went to Hong Kong, and we went up to Korea, Japan, all that.
Which carrier?
Various. I'm not sure exactly who we were with. That was kind of above my pay grade at that point. I was still trying to learn my job and all that
You
stuff.
still a gunnery officer?
What's that? No, I was an anti-submarine warfare officer at that point. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, the assistant gunnery officer was just that 2 weeks that 2 months while I was stashed before I went to school,
So
which was kind of fun because I got to be my general quarters station when we went to battle stations was in the gun director up on the very top of the ship. It was just kind of like being in a tank turret, and I had binoculars with crosshairs on them that were fixed to this thing that would move it around where I aimed. And then the control for the gun mount was like a game controller from Xbox. Of course, Xbox hadn't been invented yet, but it was very similar to the turret controllers on like the B-17 and stuff like that. And so you'd go like that to make the turret traverse left and right, and then you would go like this to elevate the gun. And so we had two 5-inch 54 guns, and they were slave to that gun director. So I would actually aim both guns. That was still a secondary backup because the real thing was the main gun plot was down in the bowels of the ship, and they did it all by radar. So there was a big radar on top of the gun director, and that was actually sending its info down to gun plot, and that's where they actually aim the guns from. But I could take control of the guns and aim them from up there optically.
But if there was a submerged submarine, how do you attack it?
Well, that was the thing. At that point, I wasn't doing anti-submarine warfare.
I know, but I mean, in anti-submarine, what's the
Then,
protocol?
well, the surface guns were used for anti-air warfare and for naval gunfire support mostly. So they weren't involved in the anti-submarine warfare thing unless the guy surfaced. And then it became another surface action. So then we were also surface warfare. But that little phase of my life had no involvement with fighting submarines. But of course, when I came back, the ship, I really liked the Adams class ship. They were great. They had all these different mission areas. And so we were also, besides the two 5-inch 54s and the Tartar missile launcher, we had a dual arm Tartar missile launcher that was our main anti-aircraft battery. It fired standard SM-1s, which was good out to about 35 or 40 miles, as I remember it. Maybe out to 50 or 60, and then the extended range one that the cruiser had that came from the Terriers, they would go out to about 100 miles. So that was our main anti-aircraft battery. And then for anti-submarine warfare, we had a box ASROC launcher that had 8. You would deploy, you'd have 7 missiles in it, and you'd have 1 empty cell, because we had nuclear ones that were in a magazine, and if we needed to fire a nuclear one, we could load it into that empty cell. Plus, you wanted an empty cell. As you did maintenance, sometimes you'd have to move one from one cell to another, and it'd give you that ability to do that. So we had 7 rocket-thrown torpedoes and 4 rocket-thrown depth charges. The depth charges were the nukes. This has all been declassified, so we don't have those systems anymore, thank goodness. And that administratively, the nuclear weapon stuff was a giant pain. And I think that's part of why they got rid of them. Plus, as a weapon system, you're like going, really? You know, when they did the test on the USS Agerholm, and the shock wave from the actual thing, and this is also unclassed now. You know, we saw you can see the films now, but back in those days, the testing was done in the 50s, and you know, when the shock wave hit the Agerholm, all the bridge windows got blasted in, and it ripped all the antennas off the ship, and there was a bunch of broken legs and all kinds of stuff, and it's like, really? The ship was rendered combat ineffective from their own weapon. And so it's kind of like a nuclear hand grenade. And so, it was eventually gotten rid of, but at that time it was a really big deal. And being an anti-submarine warfare officer was, because of that, was a big high-vis position on the ship, because the captain could get fired for basically 3 things. One of them was flunking the OPEVAL, which was the main propulsion system. If they didn't pass their engineering certification every year, why the captain would get fired. And if we didn't pass our nuclear weapons inspection that we had every 18 months, that was another one the captain could get fired for. And so the captain was pretty intent on you being good at what you did. And fortunately, I was pretty good at that stuff. So, and hunting submarines was actually pretty fun in those days. I did a lot of.
So after that deployment or tour, did you go on shore duty then, or? Actually,
no. I was funny at that point. I had qualified on the ship as a surface warfare officer, of course, and also as officer of the deck. And around 2 years in, I got changed over to be the ship's navigator, which is also kind of like the ship's adjutant. You know, you're like, work directly for the XO and CO and do the admin guys, all the yeomen work for you as well. So I had two divisions, the ship's office and the yeomen all worked for me, and then all the quartermasters and all the navigation department also worked for me. It's really considered to be a department head position. And I was still a JG. So, but I qualified, I was one of the top watch officers on the ship. So you're also command duty officer. So when on the duty sections, whenever the captain was off the ship, you were basically the quasi captain for the day. And you know, if a Pearl Harbor kind of thing happened and the captain was gone, it was my job to get the ship underway and get out of the port, even if he wasn't there. So it was, you know, I really enjoyed all that kind of stuff. But then when my tour was up, they were talking, the detailer was, you know, I still had to go to department head school. And I'm like, but wait, I've already been a department head for 2 years. Yeah, that doesn't count. You still have to go to the school. And then you'll be an official department head after that. And we're gonna put you on an amphib. And I was like, wow, that doesn't sound like much fun to me after driving this destroyer around. So I ended up going off active duty, going back to reserves, and my dad wanted me to come home and run the family business, so I went back there. That was around May of '84, I think. You know, it was a really tough decision at the time because I really liked the Navy. I wasn't leaving because I you know, didn't like what I was doing. I did like what I was doing, but so I went back there and did that a few more years, and my sister came back home, and then my wife, who I met while I was in San Diego, oddly enough, she was, when I was in ROTC, my squad leader was in the Drum and Bugle Corps. He was the squad leader there, so he was my squad leader, and then eventually he was my CO the next year, and then. But anyway, he was a class ahead of me. His sister is who I ended up going out with, and we ended up getting married.
What's her name and her maiden name?
Her name was Joan Blount. He was Ray Blount. He was a Navy helicopter pilot. And so anyway, eventually he introduced me to his sister down in San Diego, and at that point I was living on a sailboat. And well, actually, I bought the sailboat just after I'd met her, and I needed someone. I asked around for friends who wanted to help me take this sailboat. I had to pick it up at Marina Del Rey in LA, sail it down to San Diego. And so she volunteered to go on that trip, and I had a couple other friends, and we did that trip, and then we started going out after that. And, so when I got out, I went back to the lodge, and she was the sales manager at the Hotel La Jolla at the time. And so she was in the hospitality industry already. And so...
That was in San Diego?
That was in San Diego.
Which hotel?
Hotel La Jolla.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I lived up in the La Jolla area up there.
Yeah.
So I went back, and I was there about a year, and we were still communicating. And whenever I'd go down there, I'd see her and stuff. And so... I asked her if she wanted to come up and work at the lodge, and she did. So she quit her job down there and moved up to this rural resort up there. And that was a rather interesting time. It's amazing to me that we ended up getting married. Because in the summertime I was boating literally 7 days a week, and I was only home back at the lodge 2 nights a week. I was home Saturday night and Wednesday night, and so she was there working full time, basically being a jack of all trades there. She was we only usually had like one live-in person there, so she would be the housekeeping staff that would do all the cabins, and then she'd be also the waiting staff when we were doing the meals. And I think she was working a lot harder than I was, and and she had to stay there, and then I'd be gone all the time, and I'd come back, and I'd basically have to do my laundry to leave the next morning, and so that was kind of how that first couple of summers went.
Yeah. And then, how is it that you ended up back? You went into the Army.
Well, so while I was there, of course, when you come off active duty, in those days, and it probably it's still the same these days, they don't really tell you all the ins and outs of the reserve system and stuff. So I thought I was out, I thought I was gone. I get a letter one day that says, "Congratulations, you've been promoted to lieutenant." I'm going, well, that shows what you guys know. I'm not even in anymore. Well, I was still in, I just didn't know it. I was in what I now call the disappeared reserves, which is the guys that are still reserves but don't know it. And then after a while, I really, like I said, I enjoyed the Navy. I wanted to do some of that stuff, so I tried to. I looked around and found a reserve unit in the Medford area, and started trying to reaffiliate there. And I had some gastroenterological problems, so they wouldn't take me. I had to do a physical to come back in, and they wouldn't take me. So I had, and then we decided at that point that there was too many of us there, and it was really difficult, basically being back home after you've owned several nuclear weapons, and had at one time I turned on my decision. I turned an entire aircraft carrier battle group 90 degrees to avoid a submarine, and after that kind of responsibility, when you're being queried by your mom why you're going to town, it was just like, I can't do this anymore. So my wife and I decided to do something else, and I had gotten, as an anti-submarine warfare officer, I really enjoyed doing the operational stuff, and also I got involved in electronics. So I started doing electronic stuff and decided to go back to Oregon State and get a degree in electrical engineering. And this is where that really bad math background came in, because you can't hardly find a degree that's more math intense than electrical engineering. So that was a lot of work. So we moved to Corvallis and went back to school. And at that point, I found a reserve unit in Portland, the MARDES, Maritime Defense Zone unit up there. And they kind of recruited me back in, and I got another physical up there, and I was okay at that point, quasi. And so I got back as a drilling reservist, a ready reserve guy. So I had this little window of disappeared reserves between when I was on active duty and when I was back as a ready reserve guy. And that's when the Gulf War happened, the first Gulf War. I was in my senior year back there. That was a really difficult program to become an electrical engineer when you were previously a business major with no math, and that was 10 years prior, so that was a tough go. Actually, it was a post-bac degree, and it took me 4 years to do that. Super competitive. I think there was like 250 of us that started, and they only graduated about 70 of us. So I was pretty proud of that. But my last year there was when the Gulf War started, and they mobilized a whole lot of people. And I was afraid they were going to mobilize my unit, but they didn't. So I finished my school, and then I got a job with the Naval Undersea Warfare Center at Keyport, Washington, doing anti-submarine warfare, electronic, actually combat system development as my civilian job, and that was awesome. I mean, I was able to use my new education, but also my background as an anti-submarine warfare officer, and I got recruited into a program up there that was basically they were developing a upgrade to the aircraft carrier combat system that did anti-submarine warfare on the aircraft carriers. It's called the Aircraft Carrier Tactical Support Center, and we provided pre-flight, in-flight, and post-flight support to the S-3 Viking and the, at that point, H-3 dipping sonar helicopter. And so we handled that. There was another room that was attached to the Combat Direction Center, or CIC, if you will, on the aircraft carrier. And we, over a 10-year period, we upgraded that completely to a brand new system that was like 2 orders of magnitude better than the old system. And I ended up being the division officer that was in charge of that whole project at that point. We had actually 2 different teams, one that did the tactical side and one of them that did the sensor side. And I was the branch head for the tactical side and drove all that while the sensor guys were working on the LOFAR gram readers and all that kind of stuff. But both of them were a huge change in technology. We were going from the old monochrome monitors, these big giant monitors that look like they could take a tank hit and still work, to new modern Hewlett-Packard full-color workstations that were running Unix, and man, it was amazing, the stuff that we. Of course, that was before the cybersecurity issues came up, and then after it was a lot harder after that. But in those days, it was as an engineering problem, it was really interesting because they cost like 2 orders of magnitude cheaper than all this old stuff did. But at the same time, we were like 2 orders of magnitude higher tech and way more capable. So I was like, you don't get that trade-off in the engineering world too often. So it was fantastic. And we delivered that system, went through OpEval and TechEval, and then got it approved. And then we had to go out and install it on all the aircraft carriers. So I was loving it. I was, flying out to all the aircraft carriers on the COD flight, and we'd go there at a pure site availability and install the new system and everything like that. And so, meanwhile, I was in this MARDES unit down in Portland, and I was really getting kind of bored with it you couldn't really. I wanted to go back on a ship. I wanted to go back to sea. So I was complaining at work one day. I said, "Man, another reserve drill weekend is like going to a moose lodge or something. We don't have any systems to operate, so we like do a history thing and some other stuff." And he says, "Well, you should resign your Navy commission and come over to the Army and drive our ships." And I'm like, "You guys don't have any ships yet, tugboats and little stuff like that. You're all brown water." And he goes, "No, we got an actual ocean-going ship in Tacoma." And I'm like, "Nah, I don't believe it." And he goes, "Yeah." So we argued back and forth for a couple of weeks. He said, "Well, let's just drive over to Tacoma. I'll show you the ship." So we drove over there one Saturday, and sure enough, there's this Army LSE. There's a 280-foot ship, cargo ship, roll on, roll off, and they were bringing it in to park it and to moor it there. And I'm like, "Well, that looks like a hell of a lot more fun than what I'm doing." So he talked me into it. That and the fact that my Navy Reserve career was probably going to be limited because of that 4 or 5 year window there where I was in the disappeared reserves and wasn't making any points. So I said, "Yeah, this would probably be a good move for me." So I resigned my Navy commission and accepted a direct commission at that point it was the National Guard that was operating this ship. So it was a National Guard unit in Washington National Guard, direct commission as a CW2. That's the other thing. None of the regular line officers in the Army, the ships were under the Transportation Corps, and the Transportation Corps line officers didn't know anything about ships. Nobody in the Army knew anything about ships. They considered it a technical specialty. So all of the officers on the ship are all warrant officers, very similar to the Army aviation, right? whereas all the helicopter pilots are pretty much all warrant officers. They're the pilots, and then, there's a couple of the regular line commissioned officers that are the aviation side that are like the platoon commander and the company commander that are in charge of all these warrant officers and the actual helicopters. So it's the same kind of thing. There was like for the heavy watercraft that had the tugboats, there was an Army captain that was a company commander, but he didn't know anything about how to drive the boats or anything. He was just administratively in charge of them. The LSV, the ocean-going ship, was a detachment, and it actually had the commander of the ship was the detachment commander. So oddly enough, in the whole Army, there's only 2 warrant officer positions where you are the commander of the unit, and that's one of them, is the watercraft detachment commander. You're the ship captain, and you're also the command of the unit administratively. The other one, incidentally, is the Army bands. The band leader is also the detachment commander there too. So he's also gets command time for that. So I ended up switching over and ended up on this ship was the LSV-3, the Lieutenant General Somerville, out of Tacoma there, and I think I was on a tugboat for a while, for about 2 years, and then went over to the ship. And I think I got there in the late 90s, like 99 or so, and did a tour. And then I got selected to be the commander of that ship, which I got there in 2001, if I remember it. No, wait. Can't remember exactly when, and that's what got me over to the Army side.
So were you guys living at Tacoma during that time?
We were living in Poulsbo, which is just north of Bremerton.
Okay.
For my civilian job, it was like a 9-minute commute to get to there. And Tacoma was only a 40-minute drive, so that was pretty easy as well. We did a lot of interesting missions out of there. During that time period, I believe it was around 98 or so, the Army figured out that they had all these Army Reserve units, and they also had National Guard. And the National Guard was supposed to be combat arms. They're supposed to have armor and infantry and all that kind of stuff. And the Army Reserve was supposed to have combat service support, which included stuff like the Transportation Corps. So there was this big realignment in the Army, and so they said, hey, this National Guard unit that has all these ships are really supposed to be Army Reserve. So they did this big mission purification thing and moved all the armed guys out of the Army Reserve into the National Guard, and moved all the National Guard guys that were doing combat service support into the Army Reserve. So we switched over at that point, and some of the guys stayed in the National Guard, and most of them went over there. And they asked me, I'm like, hey, where's the ship going to be? That's all I'm here for, is to drive the ship. So if it's going to be Army Reserve, then that's what I'm going to be. And so that's what I did. I just administratively changed over to the Army Reserve. It wasn't that big of a change, but there was some little cultural changes there. The National Guard was a little.
Was that about the time that you went over to Iraq, to Kuwait?
No, that was earlier. That was, let's see, I got selected for the ship to command it. I'm trying to think here. I have it written down over there, but
Yeah.
it was almost, no, thanks. Yeah, this doesn't get down to the details there. I took over the ship as commander just before 9/11. And so 9/11 happened, And then, you know, after that, of course, there were all kinds of rumors and everything was flying around. And, you know, we got a warning order that we were going to get deployed. I was just coming into command, and one of the problems was I had to go to this school for the Army that was like an 11-month-long school that I had to do to get selected to command the ship. So I found the Army ship drivers have licenses, almost like a driver's license. And they're kind of similar to the Coast Guard licenses that you have as a merchant marine guy. So they actually have an Army license, and the guys on the ship, the warrant officers, have their original school to get an A2 license is, A1 license, which is basically third mate and second mate in the Coast Guard world, was really long. It was like 14 months long. Now, I didn't have to do that because they equated my Navy training and my surface warfare officer qualification as an A1. So I got that license for free, basically, and immediately reported aboard with that. So now, but I had to get the A2 license to be qualified to be the commanding officer of this thing. So at that time, you could actually challenge the class, challenge the 11-month-long school. And I couldn't leave my civilian job to go to this school that long. So I went there on a 2-week, that was my summer camp for 1 year. I went to the Army Transportation Corps watercraft school and challenged this exam. And I was allowed to do that, and I passed it. I was the only guy that ever passed it. And so after I passed it, they were like, well, that's not right. You should have to go to our school. So then they outlawed it after that. So I was the only guy to ever pass their school by not going to it. So then I was able to be put in command of the ship. So I took over command, and then, and like I said, 9/11 happened, and then around April or March, we got a warning order, or February, we got a warning order we were going to get mobilized. And so this was a big deal because they really didn't know how to mobilize anybody from the reserves. I mean, we were the first watercraft unit to be mobilized since Vietnam. And the only other guys that had been mobilized from the reserves were special forces guys, and they had only been doing this since 9/11, so just the previous couple of months. So the whole mobilization process was this giant state of confusion of how do you actually mobilize people. And so we were put on, was Article 10 orders, went to the actual Army in March, right around my birth date, actually. And our MOB site was going to be Fort Lewis, which was fortunate for us because it was like we're located right there. And so, you know, they said, okay, you guys all have to report to Fort Lewis, and that's where the mobilization, you'll be there for like a month and a half and do all this training, and then when you're certified as ready to go, you'll go. And so that was the game plan. And you're not allowed to bring personal vehicles, and you can't bring your own cell phones and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no. So all the command element, we all brought our personal vehicles, and we had everybody bring our cell phones because we're like, oh, I don't know how that's going to work. How are we going to communicate with each other? And sure enough, they didn't have any plan for any of that. So we used our personal vehicles constantly to get the job done. You know, we had to go to meetings with command and all kinds of stuff like that. And the only way we could get in contact with each other is with our cell phones. So yeah, that was the whole thing is rather cynically amusing, kind of dark humor. It's very Catch-22-esque, the whole thing. And I learned after going to the war a couple of times, it's like, I understand now how Catch-22 came around. I always thought it was a fiction book, but no, that's just Heller's experiences while he was on active duty in World War II. Because I had many things just like it. I'm like, oh, this is just craziness. So, but yeah, we went through the mode processor, and after an hour-long argument of how we were going to get deployed with the guys that are in charge of that at Fort Lewis, I convinced them all. It was one of those catch-22 kind of things. Gosh, you guys got a ship. How are we going to get that over there? So we went through a lot of things, including disassembling and putting it on a rail. So that wasn't going to work. Oops, I'm sorry. So yeah, we did it the conventional way and just drove it, out of Puget Sound, down the West Coast, through the Panama Canal, over to Virginia. And then it was kind of weird because the Army and the Navy are way different in the way, in the Navy, the ship is the unit, and in the Army, the unit is a unit, and the ship is like a truck that you check out of the motor pool. So it's just an assigned piece of equipment to you. The unit was the 548 or transportation detachment. And so that was the one from Hawaii later on. I can't remember the first one, but it was the transportation detachment is the unit. And so what they still needed an LSV in Fort Eustis, Virginia, because that was their training platform. And they had to deploy the one from there over to the Gulf. So there was 2 LSVs that were in the Gulf that were operated. They were actually regular Army ships that were operated by regular Army detachments.
You said LSD?
LSV, Logistics
Z.
Support Vessel,
Okay.
is what that stood for.
LSV.
At that time, there was 6 of them, and they were 280 feet long. They were all the same class. It was called the Besson class. That was the first ship, was the Besson. And they were very bluff bowed. They had, the front of them was very flat. They had this giant ramp that would actually stick up above the forecastle. This thing would stick up like a giant tongue depressor, and it would occlude the horizon. So you couldn't see directly in front of the ship. You just had this big ramp up there. And it was slow. They did 10 knots, was pretty much the normal speed. And but they were a pretty valuable piece of equipment. You could do a lot with them. And so they needed these ships over there to move Army Army equipment around. And at that point, we're gearing up for the war. I think we got over there in June and took over the Army. It was the William B. Bunker LSV-4 that was an active duty Army ship. We did a swap over.
How does it ride on the surface?
It's shaped like a big shoebox, and it's pretty limber. It rolls like crazy. That was funny because, most of my crew from Tacoma were all National Guard guys, and the crew itself had been together for 10, 15 years. But all they ever did was like 2-week summer camp driving around Puget Sound. And none of them had ever been to sea more than 2 weeks. And then you weren't really at sea. You were just going from place to place in Puget Sound, anchored and all this stuff. So when we did this trip from Puget Sound through the Panama Canal to Virginia, that was 30 days at sea. And most of these guys were like, this is crazy. We can't do, this is like, and there was I had a couple of guys that had been former active duty Army guys that kind of knew what it was like to be in the real Army. And I had, to me that was 30 days at sea was no big deal. We did 6-month deployments where, you'd be in the IO for 2 months without ever going to the beach. And I'm trying to get these guys to...
I assume you never had any problem with seasickness. Since
No, I was very fortunate about that. Yeah,
I assume a lot of those guys probably had problems.
Yeah, that was an issue for some of them. And some of them were pretty freaked out about, being out over the horizon where you're in the, so it was kind of weird. But they were all pretty much acclimated by the time we got to Virginia. And then they flew us over and we did this swap out. They threw us in three different, basically LSV crew is about 32 people total. And I went in the first group, they did basically 10 guys at a time, went over and basically fell onto the new ship, and they call it left seat, right seat, where the outgoing commander's there and the new commander's there, and he's still in charge, and you just kind of watch what's going on. And this was a new experience for me because, my whole experience with Army ships was just what we did in Puget Sound there and how we operated. And so now I'm seeing the real Army and how they do stuff. And, so we got underway and went out of the ship. There was two of them. The other one was going to be swapped out with another active duty unit. But they just didn't have enough active duty units to keep doing these things, so they needed help. So we left our ship, flew over and took over this other one, and their crew went over and took over our ship in Fort Eustis. So, like we were getting underway from, we were coming out of Bahrain one day, and a Navy minesweeper's out there, and it's coming in, and it's got its day shapes up that it's actually sweeping mines. And there were still mines left over from the Gulf War, from, what was that, 90, when Saddam attacked Kuwait, right? Mm-hmm. So there was still actual mine fields out there in certain areas. And so, I was kind of surprised at how little the Army ever talked to the Navy. And they didn't talk to each other at all. And so I'm like looking, and this guy's got his blinker lights going on. He's trying to call us with flashing light. And I said, yeah, I think that guy's trying to call you. And the captain takes his hat off and covers up his eyes and says, I don't see anything. And I'm like said, okay, well, that's interesting. I said, he's actually sweeping mines right now. I don't know, it might be interesting to you to see what he has to say. But yeah, they were adamant that they were not part of the Navy and they didn't have anything to do with the Navy. So that was a big thing for me. When we got over there, so the rest of the guys came in and we had to do this really fast change of command, like literally an hour. Our last busload of guys came, their guys already had all their stuff on the pier. We swapped over and it's like, okay, I got it, we're out of here. Because we had been sortied to leave Kuwait Naval Base, which was the home port over there. There was a bomb threat against a Navy ship. Well, there weren't any Navy ships at Kuwait Naval Base, except for Kuwait Navy. There weren't any U.S. Navy. And this was a constant theme. Our ship was the same color as a Navy ship, so everybody always thought we were a Navy ship. We were always called a Navy ship, and because nobody, including 95% of the Army, knew the Army even had ships, right? Mm-hmm. So we were constantly. So there was a bomb threat against a Navy ship in Kuwait Naval Base, and we're like, well, there's only 2 LSVs, and we're the only thing here that looks like Navy ships, so I think it's time to leave. So we got sortied out of there, and then we got sent up. They had a quarantine area where they were doing a lot of boardings at the time. The Navy was trying to cut down the oil traffic because Saddam was getting, that was it was an economic sanction, right? So they were like forcing all these tankers and stuff to anchor up at this place. So they sent us up there. So we steamed up in there and we got in position and dropped our anchor. And no sooner, we were still seeing anchor details, dropping the anchor, when all of a sudden this Navy DDG that next to us starts shooting a 50 caliber machine gun, and the tracers are going by. And we're like, holy crap, we seem to be at war. And so I called general quarters and all our gunners and, ran to position and stuff. And then, that was I mean, literally, this was like 4 hours after we took over the ship, so we hadn't even had a chance to do anything yet. And so, you know, I had a 50 cal and just down on the next deck, down by the bridge wing. I'm looking down, and the gunner's down there trying to get the thing locked and loaded, and it turns out the ammo belt was in there backwards. You know, they link together with a belt that links like this, and so it'll feed one direction, but if you got it this way, it won't. So there's the right end and the wrong end. Well, the damn belt was in the box wrong, so the wrong end was up going into the gun. And I don't know how long it had been that way, but so he's like yarding this, you know, belt of 50 cal out and swapping ends around and trying to get it all. So, you know, the whole ship was kind of like, wow, this, you know, day one, 6 hours after taking over, we're already at general quarters with real ammo. And we didn't even have all our weapons at the time. We were too short. We had our weapon loadout for that ship was 4 50 caliber M2s and 2 Mark 19 40 millimeter grenade machine guns, and we were missing 2 of the 50 cals. So we had to get those sent forward from Fort Eustis to us. And that was a whole other story because we're trying to get mounts for them. They were Navy Mark 16 mounts. And yeah, the Army puts a 50 cal M2 on a tripod that goes on the ground, and you put sandbags on the legs. On a ship, they're on the Navy Mark 16 mount that is a big tripod that's like 4 feet tall instead of this tall, and the ends aren't spades that dig into the ground. They have flanges on them that bolt to the deck, right? And there's a face plate and everything. And so we had to try to acquire those, and that was a difficult thing. But yeah, so that was our welcome to Kuwait, was this general quarters. Oddly enough, although we did have general quarters other times during that deployment that were real, and we had in my second deployment we had, you know, scenarios where we were locked and loaded. A lot of pirates when we were out of the Gulf and down in the Gulf of Aden area and the Horn of Africa area north of Somalia. There was a lot of pirate activity, and they would come out and go around. We go to general quarters, strip the canvas off all the guns, and show them that we're, yeah, you don't want to come over here, and they would go away at that point. So they never decided. I figured my job was not to be an easy target and let them know it was going to be a fight, and they would usually just go away. So we never actually had to engage them, but that was out of my whole 2 military combat tours. That was the only actual gunfire was that first day, 6 hours after we got there.
How long did your tours last?
The first one, we got there in June and we left midway through December. It was quite interesting. We were picking up combat vehicles at the preposition depot in Qatar, and then we would take them to Kuwait, to the main port, offload everything. We'd put our ramp down and they'd drive all this stuff off. And then they would put them on trucks and then haul them, as you know, except for the vehicles that were wheeled. The tracked vehicles they'd have to put on, you know, the tanks. They were like 80 tons a piece, and they had to go on a big multi-wheel flatbed tank carrier. But they would take them to Camp Doha, which was about, you know, 70 kilometers, I think, from where the port was and from where we were at Kuwait Naval Base. And that was Camp Doha was our headquarters. So that's where we had to go to for staff meetings and all this stuff. And so whenever we were in port, and that was the weird, you know, the Army compared to the Navy is totally there's so many cultural and other differences. But one of the things is when you go with a ship into a Navy port, that's their mission in life, right? So you send in a logistics request and you tell them all the stuff you need, and there's trucks sitting there waiting for you. There's guys there to handle your lines, and there's guys there to lift your gangway over, and there's a laundry truck that drives up, and there's a food store truck that drives up with all your food, and you can usually get gas there, and everything. When you go to an Army port, they don't know nothing about you. And you have to go to a motor pool and check out a couple of vehicles just to be able to drive around. And then you have to check out a truck, and your supply guy has to drive to Camp Doha and go get all of the food and bring it back to the ship. And everything is done that way. You're like on your own. So there's basically 60 guys in Camp Doha, all off on our own on these 2 LSVs, 70, 80 miles away from, or kilometers away from the headquarters. And none of the people at the headquarters, except for the little group that was in charge of us, knew anything about us. So we'd come there and we'd drive there. And when we first got there, you could just hop in a Humvee and drive up there for a meeting or whatever. Later on, about 6 months into it, I suppose it was around October, there was a big incident where 2 finance corps guys were driving down the freeway. They got pulled over by a cop, and then he killed them both. And so that raised the threat level. It was a terrorist attack, basically. They were Saudi guys that had come over, and it was just a terrorist attack, and they killed these 2 guys. And my first sergeant happened to be, and a couple of my guys happened to be at Camp Doha. We were there at Camp Doha that day when the ambulances drove in, and actually my first sergeant ended up trying to help out with some CPR, but and these guys were killed. And then after that, the rules changed, and we had to have a minimum of 2 vehicles as a convoy to drive back and forth, and we had to be armed. And this was a big deal because I don't know if you've ever been on an Army base. It's kind of ironic, but you're not allowed to have weapons on an Army base. And of course, everybody has weapons. So when we drive there, all of our guys have their personal weapons. So we got a whole bunch of M16s. All the officers have 45s or 9mm. We had the M9s. So we're all armed, but we don't live there. So normally when they come back from the field, they take them to their armory and put them, everything is all locked down and put away. And our armory was on the ship. So when we get there, we had no place to put these weapons. So we'd be walking around on the base with these weapons. And sergeant majors are the E9s of the Army, and their whole mission is like making sure everybody's boots are shined and their hair's cut and they're not breaking any of the rules. And so our guys were constantly getting yelled at for, why do you guys got weapons? And they'd be like, well, we don't live here. We live, what do you mean you don't live here? We live on the Army ships over in Kuwait. The Army doesn't have ships. Can't believe how many times we had to have this conversation of, yes, the Army has ships, and we actually are the crew of the Army ship. And we live over there, we don't live here, and we have to have our weapons to get here. So this was every trip you'd have to have this big deal about why we have weapons. It was just another one of those catch-22 things. So yeah, that's how things
So
worked
your
out.
second tour, when was that then?
So this tour we left that tour, we were done about 2 months before the actual combat started. And then, a bunch of stuff happened. I actually transferred to a different ship. The Army Reserve had 2 brand new ships built, and they were a different design. They were about 50 feet longer, and they had an actual pointy nose. And basically that was called a visor. And then the ramp was folded in half like that. It had a big hinge in it halfway up, and it folded over like that, and it was right behind this nose. So it was a huge change. We actually could get about 2 knots faster than the older ships because we had a semi-pointed bow. The nose of it, that whole visor lifted up like the nose of a C5. So it'd go up like this, and then this ramp would unfold and then come down. And the ramp itself was about 35 feet longer than the other one. It was almost twice as long, which made a huge difference. When you can reach that farther, the gradient of the beach, you'd have to have, the shorter your ramp, the steeper the gradient has to be for you to get up to where you can put your ramp down, right? So with a really long ramp, our ramp was like 70, 75 feet long. That meant when you did a survey of all the beaches in the world, we could operate that ship on a significantly higher percentage of the beaches in the world that you would need to do that kind of operation on, because we could reach farther. So that was a big improvement as well. But there was only 2 of them, and they belonged to the Army Reserve. One of them in the Reserve Watercraft Unit in Virginia, and the other one was in Hawaii. And so I ended up, when I got back from that tour, I got picked to be the technical expert to do the first article test of the new ship. So I went out and did this test and told them all the stuff I found wrong with it. And the active component was really totally against the Army Reserve having their own ships that were different from their ships. That was a whole big deal. And so they hated our ships. And but I found them really nice. They were, having commanded the other kind and now commanding this one, like, oh, this one's way better. And so I don't ever want to go back to those other ones. So I ended up going over to command, it was LSV 7, the Robert T. Kuroda stationed in Pearl Harbor. And I commanded that ship for 7 years, I think. Right around 2005 was when I took that one over. And so we got mobilized to go back over there in 2011. Now the LSV 8, the Robert Smalls, the one that was based out of Virginia, the way we did these deployments, and including, like I said before, we flew over and took over the Army one. Well, they got deployed and they actually drove the LSV 8 to there and replaced one of the Army ships that was over there. So now they needed us, their year was up, they needed us to go relieve them because we were the only other people that were checked out on that class of ship. And so we did our mobilization in Hawaii at Schofield Barracks, and that was, we had to do the whole mobilization process again. Now they at least knew how to do it because it had been going on for 10 years, so they had it pretty well sorted out. And then they flew us over all together to Kuwait, and we went over and took over the ship from them. And then once again, it's always the way it's supposed to, the way it's written down and then the way it actually happens. So they had a mission planned that was supposed to leave like the day after we got there. So in the meantime, the normal process of relieving a ship and doing the inventories and all the stuff is like a month. So these guys wanted to get out of there because it was right after Christmas. We got mobilized November 11th. We were over there on site just before Christmas. That was a big deal because are we going to leave before Christmas or after? And we ended up going, we ended up flying out there like December 20th or something like that, which was a kind of a morale problem. But anyway, so we get there. These guys all want to get the hell out of there. And the ship's supposed to take off like the next day. So I knew the outgoing guy because he was another reserve. We're the only 2 LSV 7 qualified guys in the entire Army. And so, we did a quick inventory. I was happy with what I saw. And we said, all right, relieve you. And then the next day we got underway and went out to sea for, I don't even remember where we went.
Joan, good to have you here. We had talked earlier a little bit about where you guys first met, which apparently was in San Diego, and you were working at a hotel. Well, tell us about which hotel was it, and how did that come about?
I had moved to San Diego after college, and I worked at the Hotel La Jolla as a marketing director in La Jolla, California.
Yeah, well, where in La Jolla is that? Or is it still there?
It is still there. I think it has a different name. It's right in the heart of the village.
Okay, yeah. We well, we had a condo down in that area, and so we, when the kids were kind of growing up, we spent a lot of time in that area, so
In La
we know it
Jolla?
pretty well. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was really a nice place.
Yeah.
So where'd you go to college?
I went to college at the University of Portland.
Okay, is that where you grew up, or where did you grow
Well,
up?
actually, I was, my dad was military, Army Air Corps in the Second World War, and
Oh.
afterwards worked for the Department of the Navy as a civilian. So I was born on Alameda Air Base,
Right.
and then he transferred to a base in Albany, Georgia, that I don't remember the name of.
Uh-huh.
And then my grade school years, he worked in the Pentagon. So he lived
Oh.
in Springfield,
Oh, so you
Virginia.
lived there, oh,
Yeah.
that was kind of
And then we retired to Oregon. So then I did my junior high and through college in Portland, Oregon.
Did your dad grow up in Oregon, or where did he?
My dad grew up in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Yeah.
Right, okay, so his old stomping grounds, more or
Yeah.
less. And he was in World War II, I think
He
you
was,
said. And
mhm.
do you remember where he was during World War II?
Mike probably remembers.
Yeah, he was a bomber pilot, and he was in the European theater for a while, and then he was in the CBI, China, Burma, India, which is kind of weird because they did some weird stuff. The bomber pilot would fly a cargo plane,
Oh,
and then they'd
yeah.
fly a bomber mission, and it's just strange. But I read his DD-214.
Or did you-
Joan had copies of it. It's pretty interesting stuff.
What I'd like to do sometime, I don't know if Mike told you, but we interview veterans here.
Mhm.
We've done like 1,300 of them over the years, and over the last 25 years, I guess now. And a lot of them, the earlier ones, were World War II. But now what I do, because I assume he's passed away, your dad, we interview family members about them.
Ah.
And so when you guys have some time and do a little, and we can interview you, or both of you, about his story and
Oh,
have it here
great.
too. So if
Yeah.
you'd like, so be thinking about that. Now, the other thing that Mike had mentioned was that his family had a fishing lodge up on the Rogue River.
Mhm.
And so then you left the hotel in San Diego and went up to
Went to the
help
fishing
out
lodge.
up. So tell us about that. It sounded like that was quite an experience.
That was a great experience. It was the Rogue River in southern Oregon and a lodge that Mike grew up at. And after he got out of the military, he went back there, and then I came up, and it was kind of very similar to what I was doing at the hotel in La Jolla, but a lot more fun. And then Mike's sister joined us, and the three of us ran
Oh.
it together for a few years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about, it sounded like there was a lot of work.
It was a lot of
fun and a
work.
lot of work too. So tell us about what basically you did up there. What were your duties?
Oh gosh, my duties were duties as assigned. So basically, in the season, you would get up at 6 in the morning, and if it was rafting, you'd just start making breakfast, wait for the rafters to leave, go out, clean all the rooms.
What was a typical breakfast?
Oh, it was a lodge breakfast, served family style, so it was huge. Eggs, bacon, sausage, pancakes, hash browns, fruit, some kind of bakery good. It was enormous.
Did you do the cooking too?
I did not cook until probably the third year I was there. But I did everything else. I did a lot of dishes. I did a lot of laundry, did a lot of cleaning rooms, did a
So-
lot of happy hours with the guests.
Would you have to clean the room every day or?
Every day.
Wow.
So if it was, I think it was, if there were 12 guests or less, I would get up, make the coffee, do all the prep work, everything but cook the breakfast, clear the dishes, wash the dishes, then go load my little cart and go clean 13 to 15 rooms, come back at 3 o'clock, start the laundry, finish the laundry around 5, go back in the kitchen, start doing all the prep work for dinner, and around 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, finish washing the dishes, feed the dog, and go to bed.
And meanwhile, I was just off river rafting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
meanwhile,
just that
Mike was
fun.
off living the life.
So I think you had mentioned you had some rooms in the lodge and then there were cabins as well. And so you had to take care of all those. So
All
were
of
they
those.
usually pretty full, I guess, during the season?
They were always full in the season. So, well, some nights in the spring, they weren't always full. So if there were less than 12 people, it was just me. And if there were 12 to 24, it was me and somebody else. Usually Mike's sister.
Now, was she there when the big flood you were telling me about came?
No, she wasn't there yet. That was in '64 when I was like 5 years old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But we had it, and then there was another one in '73 that was up in the main lodge of the floor as well.
Were
But
you
it seems
there
like
then
every year
in
there was a
70?
flood. that we had to
No,
do that.
I was there for no floods.
No floods. You're the good luck charm.
I think she came there after they built that dam.
Now, I believe you have one child,
We have one child.
and when was, it was a boy or girl? Who-
A girl. She was born. Mike, we were at the lodge a couple years, and then Mike wanted to go back to engineering school. So we moved to Corvallis, and he became an electrical engineer.
Right.
And our daughter Katie was born in his last year there, in 1990.
Okay.
She is our one and only.
And so where did she go to school and high school and stuff?
So right when Katie was about 6 months old is when Mike graduated, and he went to work at the Naval Underwarfare Center, Keyport, on the Kitsap Peninsula across from Seattle. So we moved at that time to Paulsbo, Washington.
What's the name of it?
Paulsbo, Washington?
How do you spell that?
Poulsbo.
Where's that?
It is right above Bremerton
Oh.
on the Kitsap Peninsula
Mhm.
by the Naval Underwater Warfare Station,
Undersea
Keyport.
warfare, yeah.
Undersea Warfare.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
They changed, actually,
Yeah.
they changed their name several times over the
Yes,
years.
Naval Underwater Warfare Center, Keyport.
So, yeah, close enough.
Close enough,
Yeah.
Newark. And so she grew up there and went all the way through high school and then went off to college. So
Where did she go to?
she went to Pacific Lutheran University on what's called a 3-2 program. So she got her physics degree from Pacific Lutheran University and an engineering degree from UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
And what did she do with those?
So now she lives in Sacramento and she has her own firm. She's a consulting civil engineer and she does real estate
Oh,
development.
my goodness.
Yeah.
And does she have children? Do you have grandchildren?
She has no children. She has lots of street creatures that find their way to her house. 2 dogs and a cat at the moment.
Does she live kind of out in the country? Or?
No, she lives in South Sacramento.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you get to see each other fairly
We do.
often?
We see her, we talk to her every day, and we see her quite a bit. When we are living in Bremerton for the summer, and then down here in Palm Springs for the winter, we stop and see her on our way down and our way back, and all holidays. And
Now, you were mentioning you have a Zoom meeting, so I assume you're fairly active in some capacity. What is that all about?
so this year, well, when Mike was first deployed, the first time, I had just graduated from law school and passed the bar and was clerking at the Court of Appeals. That was not very conducive to having him gone for that long period of time. So instead of practicing law, I went to work at our local community college, and I worked there for a number of years. I've actually retired from that community college 3 times, and I'm...
You were teaching or what?
No, I never taught. I was their foundation director, raising money for scholarships and students and programs. And then I was their vice president of human resources, using my legal degree. And then I was their vice president of community outreach and legislative affairs. And now I'm their president this year.
Wow.
So I've been retired for 5 years, but I took a 1-year contract back this year as their interim president, because one president retired and they like to go through a nice, robust search before they choose another one.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. So, and where did you go to law school?
Went to law school at Seattle University.
Well, when you retire from that, retire, with your background, I know we could use you here to help
Oh,
raise
what would I
money
do
and
here?
put,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know, all
well,
that kind of stuff, yeah.
That's right up my alley.
Right up your alley,
Yes.
exactly. We'll
Yeah, you do
put you in
beautiful
touch
events
with,
here. You do
Fred
fun
Bell,
events.
He's our point man on that, but he could sure use you, so be thinking about that. Okay. So Mike, I think we're just finishing up your first tour and you were going somewhere.
Well, that was the interim there where, let's see, I'd just finished up the first tour, and then I had just taken over that LSV before that deployment. That was a year-long deal, and oddly enough, when we came back from that in December, which was interesting because we had a mission like the night before we were supposed to leave, and we were offloading stuff at midnight, which is when we usually did that, and I was freezing. I was out on the bridge wing like I usually was, and I was yelled into the pilot house, said, "Hey, bring me my parka, it's freezing out here, and what's the temperature anyway?" And the bosun mate's like, "It's 98 degrees, sir." I'm like, "Oh no, this is not good." So we got on the airplane and we got off in Virginia. It was 13 degrees there, so that was like we were all freezing to death when we got off in Virginia. And that was in December. And then we had to stay in Virginia for another 3 months. So we were mostly moored at the Coast Guard, Yorktown Coast Guard Station. And that's kind of where we home ported there, which is really close to Fort Eustis, Virginia, which is where the Army Watercraft headquarters was. And then so while I was there, I had to go to advanced warrant officer school. So we did this weird deal where the school started before I demobilized from the reserve, so they actually got me these orders to send me to the school, and I was there for like 2 weeks, and then they demobilized the unit, so the whole unit came home. They flew me out to demobilize over the weekend, and then I had to go back to Virginia and finish the school, which was like another month. And then so I was actually not back home until something like May, I think it was. So that was like 13 months, that first
And you
deployment.
were, you guys were married at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's when she was
We've
clerking.
been married almost 40 years now.
Yeah, that's when she was clerking at the Court of
Court of
Appeals.
Appeals.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But you never went back to Virginia during that time?
No, I had a child and elderly parents and a full-time job and silly dogs.
So after that, it was kind of back to reserve stuff. But I noticed before 9/11, reserve stuff was the old 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. After 9/11, reserve stuff, I ended up doing like 90 days of active duty a year on different missions, where they would put me on orders for like 56 days to take the ship and go to Seward, Alaska and back, or Seattle, or one mission we did was this was later on, but one of those kind of missions this was when I was on the new ship. We took a C-17 aircraft from Long Beach to Virginia through the Panama Canal, which they turned it into a loadmaster training in Fort Lee, Virginia, but they needed to get it there. So that was that's another orders again. So yeah, I got pretty busy there for a long time. And during that period, right after we got back, they basically put me on orders to go back and be the first article test engineer guy on the brand new LSV class ship that they were building for the reserves. They built 2 of them, and one of them was stationed in Hawaii, And when that ship was delivered, which was right after the Katrina, it was built down there, and right after those two ships were just finished, and they got blown way up in the bayou like 8 miles and had to get towed back out. And so it took like another year before they got delivered to the Army. And LSV-7 ended up in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And they didn't have a captain. And at that time I had stepped away from LSV-3 because I had commanded it for 6 years, and I thought my executive officer was going to push me down the ladder in the dark of the night one night so he could step up into the captain's role. So I decided I should give him a go. And so I went, then transferred to Hawaii to the 548th Transportation Detachment and commanded that ship. And that was the new design, was 50 feet longer. And that's what I did for pretty much the rest of my career until, and then the 10 years later, after the first deployment, was when that unit got mobilized to go back to the Persian Gulf.
So were you in Hawaii during that time as well?
Off and on. It's interesting. It's very different to be a spouse of a reservist who's called up than to be a military spouse. Because I wasn't married to Mike when he was active duty. So, like he said, the reserves were something that happened on the weekend, and then a couple weekends a year. So after 9/11 happened, it was a whole different ballgame. So he was gone quite a bit. I mean, the deployments, and then really they took him anytime they could get him in those intervening years to do additional active duty days or additional missions. But that wasn't really our intended lifestyle. So it was interesting. I mean, I couldn't really partake in very much of it because I had my own career, my child, my animals, my parents. So really it was actually fairly disruptive.
Yeah. And she was basically, taking care of the home fort, and I would get sent out for 56 days or whatever. And when I did go to Hawaii as a reservist for drill weekends and stuff like that, I was basically commuting. I'd get on an Alaska flight, go over there, do my weekend, and fly home.
Okay, so you weren't there in Hawaii the whole time?
Not the whole time, no.
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
So I did get there a few times.
Yeah, good. Did you have much interaction with the other wives of the?
No, none.
of the-
No, that's the other thing. So, it's interesting. We live in a hugely military community on the Kitsap Peninsula. There's the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. There's the underwater Newark Engineering Station. And there's the Bangor Sub Base, all on our little peninsula. But that's a very Navy town. We're a very Navy town. But Mike was an Army reservist. So a lot of times it would be very interesting on the peninsula. I would say, yeah, my husband's in the Persian Gulf, or he's called up after 9/11. And they'd say, oh, what's his MOS? What does he do? And I'd say, oh, he's an Army ship captain. And they'd all correct me. They'd say, oh, no, he's a Navy. And I'd say, no, he's an Army ship captain. He has a logistics ship in the Persian Gulf. And they'd say, oh, no, honey, the Army doesn't have boats. And I'd say, oh, well, actually, the Navy has more planes than the Air Force, and the Army has more boats than the Navy. But you go on. So that was interesting. So no, so as a reservist, the reservists come from all over. So there were reserve families in Portland, Oregon, and Idaho, the first time all over the Pacific Northwest, some from California. So I never met those families at all. And then when he had the ship out of Hawaii, almost all of those families, I think I was a CONUS of one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was the only one in my family support group, which meant I got to be in charge. But everybody else, no one else was on the continental United States. They were all in Hawaii. So I met them briefly, I did interact with some of the wives in a family support role when they'd have issues, when our husbands were deployed and they couldn't get resolution. And then I would absolutely leverage my time at the Court of Appeals and make sure that any fax I sent on their behalf said Washington State Court of Appeals, which you could do as long as you paid to use the fax machine, to try to get an issue resolved. But other than that, I never met them. So as a reservist family, you don't have the support system of being part of the military community. You're not living by those other families. You don't have that shared experience. You're just sort of out there living your civilian life with this impact on the side. Yeah.
Because I had asked him about that before, because normally kind of a higher ranking officer his wife would be had a job of taking the younger girls wives under their wings, so that's what I was wondering about.
Yeah, no, that only happened a couple times when really they had issues that they couldn't get resolved, and they would call, and then.
What would be a typical issue?
Well, there was one time when the Army decided that instead of paying, the paychecks were going to the family, hopefully, instead of paying the pay that was due and keeping the withholdings, they withheld the pay and paid the family only the withholdings. So their income was only a few $100s a month, and they couldn't survive on that, and they couldn't quite get through the process to get that paycheck turned around. So that was one that we managed to work on successfully.
And sometimes some of those issues, but those are the kind of issues that came up. What I would then find out from interviewing, my crew member on the ship was, oh yeah, well, I turned off my allotment.
Yeah.
And so I get all my pay here on the ship, and then I send them, and it's like, and what exactly? Well, I got to go out to the bar and to pay for drinks, and all. It's like, no, you're turning your allotment back on, and your family, you keep yourself a little allowance, not the other way around.
Yes.
You know how it is with 19-year-old soldiers and sailors.
So several times. The few times I would talk to Mike, because I couldn't talk to him. Cell phones were not that prevalent, plus they were on a ship. So I think from the time they steamed out of port till the time they were in theater, the only times I ever talked to them was when there was a ham radio guy that would somehow connect up with him and then patch us through, and then it was very brief. But then when they were actually on the ship, I could send emails. And so I would email saying, here's an issue for this family. You need to talk to your sailor.
Yeah, that was a huge technology difference between the two deployments.
Yeah.
In 2001, that time frame, a lot of our comms were via the Mars network. Like you said, it'd be AF or HF. You'd get on the radio and do a HF call to some ham operator near Tacoma. He'd hook you up on the telephone, and we would actually talk that way. So that was, email was not really available for civilian use between the military at that point.
Yeah.
But then 10 years later, when I went back, everybody had an email address, and then, there was social media, all that stuff, and everybody had a cell phone. Everybody had a cell phone. They get a SIM chip from Kuwait, and that actually became much more problematic from the command perspective, because it'd be like, God, let's get to sea. We got to get out of cell phone range, and everything will be fine. As soon as we'd come back in, then the whole network would get flowing, and the rumors would start, and all kinds of crazy stuff would happen. But yeah, at that point, during the second deployment, we had much easier communications.
Yeah.
than we did
So,
the first time.
tell me about that second deployment. When did it take place, and how did it come about?
Well, it was the unit was mobilized in November of 2011. So it's almost exactly 10 years later. I was brought on 6 months earlier as a command def to get the unit ready to deploy. we had more time. They were way better at deploying people by then. That first one, we were like the first guys out of the box. They had no idea how to do it, but now it was all, you know, they'd been deploying units for years now, so it was totally different. The mobilization site was Fort Shafter in Hawaii, if I remember right. That's probably, anyways, it was in Hawaii. And so we mobilized out there and we did it a little quicker. And then we flew as a whole unit to Kuwait. And once again, we took over the ship that was already out there. And the reason that we had to go for that one was because in this particular, at this time, the other reserve unit in Virginia that had LSV-8, the other LSV-7 class ship, had steamed that ship over there and did their year there, and now they needed a relief crew. And we were the only guys in the entire Army that were qualified on that platform of ship besides them. So we were automatically in the queue to go to that. So we flew over and took over from them. And the normal relieving process is supposed to be like 3 weeks to a month long. But we got there like right before Christmas. They wanted to get home. Plus they had a mission schedule that was going to be out for like a week, and we didn't want to stay in barracks for a week, and they wanted to get the heck out of there. So I felt comfortable having already been over there and knew the ground and knew all the ports and everything, that we basically relieved them in 24 hours. They got on a plane and flew home, and we went to sea the next day. And so, yeah, that tour was pretty interesting. The first one, we took all the stuff in for the war that hadn't started yet. And now this one, we were kind of taking stuff out. And literally, the first meeting that I went to, with that mission, we went down to Bahrain again, which I was happy to go because I did a lot of stuff with Fifth Fleet. I was the only Army guy that even knew where Fifth Fleet was, I think, but because of that SWO background and my job at Keyport, developing that combat system for the aircraft carriers, I had just a lot more knowledge of naval operations and what they could do for us, and the SWO pin was a big help. So,
Big picture, what was going on over there at that time?
well, and that was right when we got there, they had a big news thing. It was a big deal that we had just withdrawn from Iraq. The last Jeep drove across the border and we were out. That happened like the day after we got there. And then we went to this meeting with the white shipping, the people that Naval Command and Control of Shipping, they used to call it. They're the guys that coordinated all the cargo ships and stuff. And apparently, the same day that the last Humvee drove across the border, we had 2 big cargo ships that were hauling arms and stuff into Iraq for the Iraqis, and they had armed security forces on board for anti-piracy stuff, and the Iraqis arrested them all. And it was a big diplomatic problem that happened like the next day, which we ended up doing a big mission later on to take the stuff they were supposed to take in there. We had to take it all the way to Jordan, which was a really good mission for us. They had us load up all this stuff and take it to Jordan, which meant we had to leave the Puget Sound, go all the way to the Gulf of Aden, up the Red Sea, and into the Gulf of Aqaba at Jordan. It took us like 9 or 10 weeks to do the whole mission to get back, so that was great. But we were hauling, instead of new stuff right out of the depot, we were hauling kind of decrepit, beat up stuff that was going back to either be destroyed or sent back to get repaired, and some of it was battle damage stuff, which we had to be careful from because you don't know what kind of toxins are in there if they were hit with depleted uranium and stuff like that. So we hauled a lot of a lot of containerized cargo as well, both times. It'd be, you know, we used to call it fort building equipment. Basically, the stuff that they were using to build. I think they called them HESCO. They're cages they'd fill in full of rocks. It was part of the barriers they built, and plywood to build bunkers and stuff like that with, and concrete and all kinds of stuff. So that was the kind of stuff we were hauling around. And that was a longer deployment. The first one was like 6 months on site. This one was a year over there. So.
And you were during that time?
That time he was gone for 2 years. I was at the community college as a vice president. Our daughter was graduating high school and going off to college,
And you weren't able to get any R&R or anything like
That one
Yeah,
we
we
did.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did, actually. We spent 3 weeks in Paris.
Wow.
I was gonna fly over and meet him, and we thought we would travel around, but because of his position, he had to be able to tell him where he was every single night in advance, and that seemed kind of onerous to try to make all that happen. So what we did instead was we just booked one place for, I think it was 17 nights in Paris, and then we took day trips wherever we wanted to go, and so that was fun.
Yeah.
That was great fun.
Yeah,
That second deployment was a lot easier than the first deployment. Our daughter was older, and our finances were different. I mean, the first deployment, when he got called up, we learned that an Army ship driver makes about half of what he made in his civilian career. It was like, well, that was an adjustment that we weren't quite anticipating. But by the second deployment, we kind of had it dialed in. Our finances were different. And the biggest highlight from our house was that we had a daughter who was very smart in math and science, like her dad. That was not my forte. Law school was for very smart people who don't do math and never want to see it, and really don't care about science. So Mike had to buy all the books, all the math and physics books, and take them with him. And he had to do his math and physics homework every night, and he had to email it from the ship so that I would have the answers so that I could help provide guidance to our daughter. And then when the problems got really gnarly, I would say, email your dad. It's going to take him, 24 hours or so to respond. But she would email him the problem, and then he would, usually when she got up in the morning, she'd have an email back with how to go through the process. So he didn't get out of math and physics tutoring.
And actually, in that phase, technology had advanced. So now we did have the capability, and Kate and I would
Yeah.
FaceTime each other.
Oh.
So that was available at that point. It was FaceTime. So that was helpful for that.
During all this time, did you get back to the lodge at all?
No, I don't think no. During your first deployment, I think I went to the lodge a couple times, but not during the second. Just too busy.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot happening in our house that needed to go on without disruption. So
when you got back, then what? We finished that.
Well, that was, gosh, there was, on both deployments, what was interesting to me when I got there was to find that there was virtually no communication between the Army and the Navy. And we were traveling through the same water. I mean, we would literally be driving along on our ship, standing on the bridge wing, having coffee, and there'd be this whole Navy fleet, and this Navy destroyer or whatever would come racing over to us and pull up by our bridge wing, and because we didn't even have radio communications, we had the different frequencies and everything, and they would yell across and say, "Hey, we got like a big war game going on here," and it's like, "Hey, we're just driving through, nowhere." It was just insane to me that we're using the same battle space with no comm. So I figured out fairly quickly when I got there how to set up communications between us and the Navy with various methods, and set those things up so that we could talk to them. And also, we didn't have identification friend or foe codes, the Mode 4 codes. We had the equipment, and that was one thing. The Army ship had a great radio room with all this capability, but they never trained us on any of it. And so we had IFF transponders, but none of the Army guys knew what they were. But I knew what they were because I had learned basically from the Navy, and also I was a pilot, so I recognized, oh, that's a transponder there, and this is where the Mode C goes in. And when I was in the Navy, we used to use that IFF all the time, but the Army never knew anything about it, really. It's just a box. So I went over to 5th Fleet headquarters and found the lieutenant commander that was in charge of assigning those codes, and got 4 codes assigned to the Army ships, and went back and told everybody how to use those boxes, and just stuff like that, and set up radio comms and everything else. When I left, everything was good. 10 years later, when I came back, hadn't been used since I left. Everything was back to the same way it was, 0. No one knew anything. And I went back to 5th Fleet headquarters, talked to this, the 3rd, 4th guy that was there in that job. And he brought up his database, and sure enough, he says, hey, look, there's 4 Army ships in here, and they were the 4 ships that were in there when I left. And now we were new ships, so I just said, well, I'll just give you the new ship names, and you can just reassign those codes to us. So got that all set up, and then there was a lot of stuff like that I, in my Navy civilian job, with the network-centric warfare stuff that we were doing, I was able to make some. Actually, I got a commendation letter from the Navy, saying, "Hey, thanks for all the help on this network-centric warfare, because we now have the capability of our patrol craft to use the stuff that you set up on your ship to enable us to maintain the C4 the command and control picture for the whole fleet instead of just the big ships." So I had set that up on LSV 7, kind of in the background with no one noticing, but it worked out a lot better. But eventually, I think it was around August, all that stuff kind of came to culmination because it was a big event that happened. One of our LCUs was transiting down to Bahrain or somewhere, and we would go right by Iran, about 15 miles off the coast when we did that. And if you look on the map, on the chart, it was within Iran's ADIZ, or air defense zone, but it's not their territorial waters, right? Their territorial waters are 12 miles out. So we would be outside of that, but still in the ADIZ. And so we would frequently get hassled by IRGCN, the Iranian Guard Force Coast Guard guys. They're kind of fanatical Muslim, and you never knew what those guys were. They'd come out and they'd get online with 4 or 5 high-speed patrol boats and come racing at us like PT boats. And we'd go to general quarters and man up all the weapons and be ready. And then they'd come out and circle around us a few times, and off they'd go. Well, they did one of these things where they came out in mass after one of our LCUs just to hassle them. And they sent a spot report back to headquarters, and somebody in headquarters, some mid-grade officer, I'm sure, kind of changed the verbiage to what they sent was, hey, we're being hassled by these guys, and here's our position. Well, they put it on the map, and they said, oh, they're in the ADIZ. And so the report that went up from there was one of our LCUs is being attacked by Iranians in Iranian national waters. So that was like a red flare straight to the Pentagon. And so, as you can imagine, even at the 3- and 4-star level that night, it was, so we were going down to the big the big port down in United Arab Emirates down there, Dubai. And we were like 2 days out from there, or 15 hours, something like that. It was the middle of the night. I got a satellite call from that and said, you need to rendezvous with the USS Benfold and they're going to escort you down. And I was like, okay, well, that was fortuitous because really I was the only Army ship that could actually knew how to do that. And so we rendezvoused with the Benfold, they escorted us in, and that's where all that coordination work came out to be really helpful that I had done beforehand. And when we got back from that, we did one more mission, and then they just said, you guys aren't going to get underway anymore, and you're going to start your turnover, and we're done with our deployment. Well, I've been having some health issues, so I said, well, I'm going to go to the doctor then, if we're not going to get underway anymore. And they ended up medevacing me out of there. So I was flown via a medevac aircraft, a C-130, to, I think it was Saudi Arabia. And then they put me on a C-17 medevac and flew me to Landstuhl, Germany. And I was over there for like 2 weeks, and then they sent me back on a civilian flight to Fort Lewis to SeaTac. And then I was moved into the Warrior Transition Battalion in Fort Madigan Army Medical Center at Fort Lewis. And I was there for like 8 months. I had a big surgery and all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of how the ship. Meanwhile, the rest of the unit, they were done about 30 days after I left, and I flew them all home to Hawaii. And then we kind of all met up again. We had a big award ceremony and other stuff after I got released from the hospital. And
John, I guess you were concerned about his health at that time, or what was going on?
I was concerned about a lot of things at that time. Yeah. Yeah, he was in Landstuhl, but I knew he was okay. And then when he came back in the Wounded Warrior program, you know, Fort Lewis was about 45 minutes from our house. So we had to live there for 8 months. So I go see him, and I come home.
Yeah, it took a while before I could even get weekend privileges to drive home, which was like 45-minute drive to get home, or an hour.
Yeah.
So it was weird. It's like I'm here, but home is like right there.
Yeah.
I just can't go there. So that was a 1-year deployment that I was gone for 2 years for, because I was there the 6 months before the deployment and another 8 months after. So yeah.
So what year was that when you got out of the hospital then?
What did we say? It was
2012? 13?
13, I think. Yeah.
But you stayed in the reserves then?
Yeah. Then that deployment, I was a CW5, and I was actually when the ship got mobilized, I had moved to the staff. I was the command chief warrant officer for the 9th Military Army Mission Support Command, which is the theater commander for the Army Reserves stationed in Hawaii there. So he was a 1-star general. He owned the entire Pacific Theater for the Army Reserves, and I was his command chief warrant officer in charge of all the warrant officers in the whole theater. But the ship didn't have a captain anymore. I mean, they were so rare to have that qualification. So anytime they needed to get the ship underway to do any mission or not, I'd say, General, hey, I got to go drive the ship. And so I would go from the headquarters all the way down to the lowest level, officer commanded unit, which is a detachment, and be in charge down there. And then I would send message traffic up the chain. And then when I'd get back to my desk job back at the headquarters, say, hey, General, did you ever see this message that I set up? And we would kind of figure out how long it took stuff to get from here to here. And it was kind of wild. So I was actually a CW5 when that second deployment happened. And I got sent back to the ship to go do that because they literally had no other guys that were qualified to command that ship in the Army Reserve. And so that was way better as far as I'd much rather do that than be sitting at the staff desk. So when I got back from that, I had to go back to the staff job again. And I actually ended up transferring to a 2-star command in Los Alamitos, California. And same thing, I was in charge of all the warrant officers west of Mississippi, basically there. And a direct report to the 2-star general there. That wasn't near as fun. I like driving the ship.
Yeah.
So
I bet. So what was your rank when you got out?
CW5. Yeah, that's as high as it goes.
Right.
And that was, as a CW5, it was fun being a CW5 because they were like a unicorn. Nobody ever saw one.
How many were in the Army at that time?
CW5s, maybe a couple hundred.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty rare.
I said there was way more generals than there were CW5s. So, I mean, I had kids who'd come up and say, "Sir, can I take your picture?" Sure, why not? Yeah, the coin slot.
So was it 2017 you?
Yeah, it was
got out?
2017 when I retired.
So, okay, and what prompted that, or had you kind of
He was
planned on
old.
doing?
There was a couple things. Yeah, it was, for one thing, because of my deployments, I could retire a little. We had to retire at 60,
Okay.
and I was only like 8 months from that. So that was when I was going to have to retire anyway. Because of all my deployment time, I could retire earlier and still get the same benefit as if I stayed. So I decided, and I was getting sick of doing desk work and being in charge of all these warrant officers.
And also, isn't that about when you retired from your civilian job?
Yeah.
So they kind of went hand in hand.
So all this time, your civilian job, what were you doing in that?
At that point, I was the chief engineer for the test and evaluation department at Keyport. So we did all of the,
At where?
at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center at Keyport, yeah. So we owned all of the range craft. We owned the ranges where they would fire undersea weapons torpedoes, Mark 46s and Mark 48 torpedoes. We did a lot of testing of unmanned undersea vehicles and all that kind of stuff. And I was I was the chief engineer for that whole deal. So, which wasn't near as fun as, once again, as being the guy in charge of developing the combat system for the aircraft carriers. I'm just glad that job lasted 10 or 12 years. That was a lot more fun job.
When's the first time either of you came to Palm Springs to visit?
The first time I came to Palm Springs to visit was in my 20s when we lived in San Diego. I came for a girls' weekend. And then the second time, excuse me, I came with my daughter. She was going to some kind of engineering conference. So I just sort of tagged along and for the pool, the hotel and the pool.
Right.
And then we came during COVID. We were both retired during COVID, and we decided, the Pacific Northwest is beautiful in the summer. In the winter, it's a little dark and a little wet and a little cold, and we thought, well, we're not going to sit out this whole summer or this whole winter in our house. So I bought a travel trailer one night, and after dinner I said to Mike, "Are you busy? Because I bought a trailer and I need you to go haul it." Because, as most military wives, you just live your life. You're just going to get it done. And we don't ask permission anymore because we run our own lives. So I said, "I bought a travel trailer. I need you to haul it." So we went and got it.
We're going to Palm Springs.
Yeah, and I said, "We're going to
Kind
Palm
of like
Springs."
the sergeants in the Army, right?
Yeah,
The chiefs in the
this is
Navy.
what we're going to do. And we thought if we were really careful, we could maybe spend Thanksgiving with his brother and sister-in-law down in San Diego. But we thought, well, Palm Springs seems like a nice place to take that travel trailer and leave it. So we found a resort down here that we absolutely loved. So we stayed, I think we were staying 3 weeks. And at the end of 3 weeks, they said, "Oh, I extended us for 3 months because I'm not going home."
Which resort was that?
It's Sky Valley. It's out past the Coachella Preserve,
Oh, okay.
and it's beautiful. It's got lots of mineral hot springs, pools, and lots of activities, lots of fun stuff. So we came to stay for 3 weeks over Thanksgiving. We didn't leave till the end of March, and then we came back with our trailer the next October and decided and planned to stay till the following March. And then we liked it so much we thought, well, we'll just buy a place and then not have to haul the trailer back and forth. So this is our 5th year down here. It's
And
wonderful.
where's your place? Where did you buy?
In Sky Valley.
Oh,
It's
okay.
called Sky Valley Resort.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, is it a house or is it a?
It's,
mobile?
what do they call them? Park models.
Oh,
The resort, yeah. There's about 1,000 spaces in there,
Oh,
but
yeah,
they have
yeah.
beautiful pools and pickleball
Nice,
and
yeah.
horseshoes and
So how long does it take you to drive to the museum from there?
what, 25
It takes,
minutes?
yeah, it takes about 25 minutes.
So that,
Yeah.
get out on the freeway?
No,
No.
actually, I come down Dillon, take a left on Palm, and then that turns into Gene Autry Trail and
Right,
we're here,
yeah.
so, yeah.
Okay, not bad, yeah.
25 minutes from here, 15 minutes from Costco.
Costco, right?
That's the
You
landmark.
gotta know where that is,
Yeah.
yeah. But you still go back in the summer to,
Yeah.
up by Bremerton, is that where you are?
Yeah, we usually leave in April because Mike has a retirement job driving a cruise ship for American Cruise Lines.
Oh,
And he does that in the summer while we're there.
About,
And then,
about 8 months after I retired, she's like, she sent me an Indeed ad that she had gotten off of her Facebook or something, and said, you should look into this. It was a recruiting thing from American Cruise Lines. They were looking for cruise ship captains.
now that we're used to this deployment life, you should go somewhere.
Yeah, she's like going, why are you still in my house and I'm not cooking lunch again? So I'm like, yeah, okay. So I applied with them, and it turns out that an Army LSV and American Cruise Lines cruise ship are very similar in their technical and the mission as far as the way the ship drives. So I was like instantly qualified to drive that. I didn't need any training. I could drive that cruise ship just the same.
Yeah, but he just does the one route that is close to our home. The American Cruise Lines has a Puget Sound cruise, and so it goes out of Seattle, and it goes through the Puget Sound and over to some really lovely little port towns in Washington that are hard to get to otherwise. And folks go to Victoria still and see Bouchard Gardens, and they see little towns in the Pacific Northwest and go through the beautiful San Juans. And he doesn't have to fly anywhere.
and
It's a
that's-
7-day cruise.
a
So it's-
7-day cruise?
Yeah.
Yeah, 7-day
So,
cruise.
we might have to think about that. We haven't really,
Yeah.
we like to cruise or have in the
Yeah.
past, and that sounds like kind of.
It's a lovely
We've been
cruise.
thinking about something that's, you don't have to go very far,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I go along when I can,
yeah.
and it's always fun, no matter how many times I do it, so.
Yeah. So how long you been doing, how many summers?
I started doing that in 2019. Yeah.
Okay,
And so pretty much every
yeah.
year
What's the
since.
name of your ship? Or you do the same one
I'm
every
on
time?
American Spirit.
American Spirit, it's called, yeah. They're, the company is based out of Connecticut, and they got about 24 cruise ships now. They do a lot of trips on the Mississippi. And here on the West Coast, they've got 4 or 5 ships now running the Columbia Snake River.
Don't they go back to like the 40s, or is that the American Cruise Line that I've heard?
Could be, it's been around a long time.
I don't think they go back
quite
that
that
far,
far.
but they've been around. It was a family-owned, it's still a family-owned thing, but it's a big outfit now. Like I said, they got about 24 ships, and they're building 2 a year. I don't know where they're gonna employ them all.
How,
but,
how big is your ship?
They're small ships. Mine is one of the smallest because I didn't want to go do the rivers. I do the Puget Sound because I like it and it's really easy for me. But it's about 210 feet. Passenger count is about 85.
Oh, okay, that's quite smart.
Got a really good galley that prepares all the foods. It's a big dining room.
Yeah.
And we just go port to port. Some days are long, some days are 7, 8 hours underway, some days are 2 hours underway.
Maybe you can send me a link to it and
Sure.
I can check it out.
Sure.
Check your ship out, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, when's the first time you came to the Air Museum or visited the Air Museum?
Well, the first trip, I've been an air museum kind of guy for my whole life.
Or this, I mean, the Palm Springs Air Museum?
Right. So when on our first trip here, I'd always heard about the Palm Springs Air Museum. It was pretty good, so I came over here and ended up getting a membership. And well, I don't know, that was the first year we were here in 2002, and I've kept up
2020.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
and kept up my membership ever since. And then last year we had some friends that were up here. I brought over because they were going to do the engine light off on the Memphis Belle. Anyone wanted to see that? So, and then when I was just wandering around, taking them around, and I ran into Camp Dowdy, right, at the Falcon simulator, and we started chatting, and they said that Al Crossley was going to be going to Thailand for like a whole month, and he was going to be the only guy there. And so I told him a little bit of my background in IT, combat systems development, and also I did a lot of simulator stuff. And so we kind of made a deal I'd come and help him there. So I volunteered, and I started, learned how to run the simulator, and I started coming in 2 or 3 days a week doing that. And I submitted an application to be a docent here. I was a docent already on the USS Turner Joy Museum ship in Bremerton, which is very similar to the ship that I was on when I was on active duty. So I kind of knew what being a docent was all about. And so, yeah, my computer application kind of got lost in the system somewhere along the way. So I think I was here as a volunteer for 8 or 9 months before we figured out that it fell in the void somewhere. So we resubmitted that, and at least we were able to recreate all the hours and everything. So when I got
good.
so yeah, that's.
Well, it's sure good to have you aboard. Maybe we're getting ready to wrap it up. Any parting thoughts from either of you?
I enjoying what we're doing now, and I didn't think I would get another job after I retired and still be doing it at this point.
Yeah.
I didn't sign up for the 401k because I knew I wasn't going to be doing it that long, but yet here it is. I'm
Here it
still
is.
doing it.
Well,
And I'm really enjoying and coming over to the Air Museum. When Joan's not here, I come over like 4 or 5 times a week.
I always know where he's going to be.
yeah, there you go. I usually like to ask people, guys like you, about, and maybe I'll do both of you. I'll start with you, I guess, Mike. If you had any advice for a young person wondering whether they should go into the military or go to school or get a job or what, with your experience and background, what you've seen, what might it be?
Oh gosh, and that's changed over time too. I used to was really big on telling people that the military is a great way to go, especially if you didn't know what you wanted to do in college. If you didn't know if you wanted to go to college. I found so many high school kids that really didn't know where they were going after that. And I always felt that was a good place to go to get sorted out, to finish off becoming an adult. I was at Oregon State for 4.5 years of my undergraduate degree, and then 10 years later, I was back for another 4 years as a post-bac, getting an engineering degree. And I saw how different just my experience was going straight out of high school, not knowing really what I wanted to do, except for I absolutely knew I wanted to be a naval officer. So I had a goal, but a lot of the kids didn't really know what, they didn't even know what they wanted to major in. But when you came back and you went after the military, I had a game plan at that point. I knew what I was there for, why I was doing it, and I was married. My grades mattered. I was much more, I barely was able to maintain a 3-point grade average in a business major without having to do any math the first time I was there. And I almost flunked out the first term. And when I came back, I knew my grade. I was in an extremely competitive program in electrical engineering there. I think we started off with about 250 kids, and they only accepted about 80 into the last 2 years of the program. And you had to have like a 3.3 grade point average or you weren't going to be an electrical engineer. So very focused, and Joan, was a team effort. She found a great job down there and did, we had a plan and we worked it. And so I tell all these kids, if you don't know what you want to do, the military is a great place to go and grow up, and you'll get some great experiences. After the war started, it got a little, it's like, well, I was going to join the Army, the National Guard, and it's like, well, now just understand, if you do nowadays, you will end up in Iraq for a tour. That's just the way it is. And so, yeah, it became a little, because I wanted to tell them the way things really are. So yeah, it changed. It changed from the 1 weekend a month and the 2 weeks of the year to now it's going to be a bigger factor in your life. But still, it's a good place to become an adult. Yeah.
And Joan, you've been around young people, especially raising your daughter.
Yeah.
How about you? Any thoughts?
Well, I've been in a community college setting for over 20 years. So I work with high school students, Running Start students that are in high school trying to figure out how to get their college education at the same time, all the way to people who come back later in life, right? And our community college has the second biggest veterans population in the state of Washington. So I would concur, if you are young and you don't know what you want to do, you don't know what your skill set is, you haven't been anywhere except where you were raised, the military is an excellent way to find your way, to find your place, find what you're good at, what your skill set is, to see the world, to go places, to do things. It's a commitment, so I always tell them be very careful about your commitments and what you want to get out of your commitments. But then a lot of them return to school on fantastic veteran benefits. It pays for their education. It supports them as they're getting their education. A lot of community colleges in particular in our country have wonderful programs for people getting out of the military and transitioning and coming back and needing veteran support services. They're usually older than average students. But anybody who wants to improve their life through education can certainly do it through a combination of the military and their educational benefits.
Thank you. Mike, I want to thank you for your service to our country. Thanks for your service to the community and for being here at the Air Museum. We're really glad to have you. Joni, thank you so much for sharing
Nice to
with
meet
us
you.
today.
Thank
and thank you for all the things that you have done and are still doing.